Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Megan Hargan. In 1983, Steve and Pamela Hargan welcomed their first daughter Megan, and 2 years later, their second daughter Ashley was born. Almost 8 years later, in 1993, they had another daughter, Helen. However, tensions within the family began to rise. Steve and Pamela started to argue, which ultimately led to their divorce while the girls were still young. Pamela received custody of the daughters, and soon after, she and the girls relocated to Potomac, Maryland. Pamela loves and cares for her daughters as well as for her work. She worked for a decade as a human resources manager before advancing to vice president at a large company. Neighbors noted that her daughters got along well and often played in their backyard with their pets. Due to her job requiring travel both domestically and internationally, eldest daughter Megan helped her mother raise her youngest sister Helen. Pamela's career peaked when her company merged with an international scientific applications corporation, resulting in a significant increase in her income. Despite this, she remained very diligent in her charity work and regularly donated part of her income to help people in difficult circumstances. She also provided generously for her family, ensuring her daughters had everything they wanted. Thanks to her professional success, Pamela was able to purchase a stunning property worth millions in a trendy area of Fairfax County, Virginia. The family's lifestyle was enviable, and Pamela took pride in her daughters, serving as a role model for others. However, they also faced envy from some. Beneath their seemingly perfect life, the family encountered common issues. As the girls grew older, a rivalry developed between them. Pamela noticed that Megan was facing the most difficulties due to her parents' divorce. This led her to develop feelings of jealousy and resentment towards her younger sister, Helen. She expressed her frustration by accusing their mother, Pamela, of favoring Helen. Her resentment deepened after Helen graduated high school and, like their mother, enrolled at the University of Dallas in 2014. At university, Helen became friends with a young woman named Erin. Initially, Erin viewed Helen as a modest and shy girl who rarely smiled. However, as they got to know each other better, they formed a close friendship. Erin discovered that Helen was actually a kind and sincere person dedicated to her studies. Despite her family's wealth and good standing, Helen took a part-time job as a waitress at a restaurant near the university. It was there that she met Carlos Gutierrez, a 30-years-old from Texas. They quickly started dating, becoming nearly inseparable. In 2017, Helen's middle sister, Ashley, got married at the age of 32 and moved out of the family home. Megan, the eldest sister, also married at 34, to Frank, a man from West Virginia, and they had a daughter named Molly. When Frank went to serve in the military, Pamela welcomed Megan and Molly into her home, allowing them to stay as long as needed. That same year, Helen graduated from university. Although she had intended to move in with Carlos, she returned to Pamela's home in Virginia, where her older sister Megan and 6-year-old niece Molly were living. At that point, Pamela was pleased with her accomplishments and, at 63, intended to retire. She decided to renovate a house she planned to buy for her youngest daughter, Helen, in Northern Virginia. This decision upset Megan, who had always felt that her mother favored her younger sister. Over time, the relationship between the sisters, Megan and Helen, became very strained. Tamara North, the sister of Pamela and the girl's aunt, later confirmed this. She noted that Megan harbored feelings of resentment towards Helen. Having cared for Helen since she was a child, Tamara observed that Megan was unwilling to acknowledge her younger sister. Unlike Ashley, Megan refused to help care for Helen from the moment she was born and would not play with her. Although the rivalry was clear, no one could have predicted that this mix of jealousy, envy, and later greed would lead to a tragic outcome. On the evening of July 14, 2017, The neighbors of Pamela quickly realized something was wrong when they saw the Fairfax County Police arriving at the estate. The emergency call had come from Carlos, Helen's boyfriend, who was in Dallas, Texas, and far from the scene. He expressed concern for Helen's well-being after she had called him with a strange story about a shooting. When the police arrived at the building, it was already too late. Upon inspecting the premises, they discovered the body of Pamela lying face down in the bathroom, covered with a blanket. It was evident that she had suffered a fatal head injury. Moving to the second floor of the spacious house, they found Helen in her bathroom. She was sitting on the toilet with a weapon between her legs and pointed upwards. It appeared that after killing her mother, Helen had ended her life by using her socked toe to pull the trigger after removing her shoe. As the investigation progressed, detectives realized that their initial hypothesis might not be correct. A family secret began to come to light. Officers secured the area around the house and interviewed neighbors. Detective Brian Byerson, who was leading the case, reached out to Steve, Pamela's ex-husband, to inform him of the tragic events. Overwhelmed with grief, Steve immediately called his other two daughters, Ashley and Megan. Megan, the oldest sister, said she was driving her daughter to West Virginia, but immediately turned around to go to her family's house. When Ashley and Megan arrived, both sisters were in shock and crying while speaking with the police. They both believed that Helen had ended her life, especially Megan. She recalled that when she left the house at 1:30 p.m., with her daughter Pamela and Helen were angry. She noted that both Pamela and Helen were very upset. Helen was particularly distressed because their mother had stopped helping her buy a house. Pamela, their mother, disapproved of Helen's relationship with Carlos and did not want Helen to move in with him. Besides, Megan said that Helen had been feeling angry and depressed for the past few months. During questioning, Ashley confirmed that Helen had previously faced emotional issues and had once talked about self-harm. Ashley also mentioned that their mother, Pamela, suspected Helen of using banned substances and wanted to seek help for her. A weapon found next to Helen confirmed that it belonged to Megan's husband, Frank. He had brought the weapon to Pamela's house because he had seen two suspicious men nearby a few days before the tragedy occurred. He requested that the police examine Megan for gunpowder residue on her hands. This was particularly important because Carlos's earlier statement had led the police in a different direction in their investigation. To uncover the truth, they needed to gather all available evidence, regardless of how confusing or insignificant it might seem, until the full story emerged. After a thorough investigation that lasted over a year, the lab confirmed the presence of gunpowder residue on Megan's hands, indicating that she had recently used a weapon. An autopsy revealed that Pamela had been shot twice, while Helen had only suffered one bullet wound. However, it was determined that the path of this bullet to Helen's neck was at an angle inconsistent with a self-inflicted gunshot. During the investigation at the scene, detectives noticed several unusual details. Pamela's phone was found on top of the blanket covering her, which seemed unnatural. Furthermore, no fingerprints were found on Helen's phone, despite the fact that she had called and texted Carlos before her death. There was also a small amount of blood on the weapon, raising suspicion since she should have had more blood if she had ended her life. This suggests that someone else pulled the trigger. Additionally, Megan's DNA was found in the bag with the weapon, which could be explained by her having brought the weapon into the house and handled it. Investigators discovered documents detailing Pamela's bank accounts and passwords, but these could not be used as evidence because they were not included in the search warrant. The day after the incident, Megan was allowed access to the property and belongings. When police conducted another search later, they included the albums and documents in their report, but they could not find them, indicating that someone had removed them. The strongest evidence against Megan, apart from Carlos's testimony and the police's suspicions, came from her own actions. Detectives found that just days before her mother and younger sister were killed, she was trying to buy a house for herself. She claimed she had her mother's financial help to close the deal, but in reality, she frequently changed jobs and had only $30 in her bank account. On the day of the murders, Megan needed to deposit over $400,000 to secure the purchase of her dream home. Court documents revealed that Megan was struggling financially and had tried to illegally transfer $420,000 from her mother's bank account, Pamela. Her plan was thwarted when Pamela's bank alerted her about the attempted transfer, prompting her to freeze the funds. This information was reported to the detectives by the finance department of the company, which became suspicious of the transaction and later learned about Pamela's death 5 days afterward. After the murder, Megan was called in for questioning again and was informed about the results of a fraudulent money withdrawal. Initially, she said that Pamela had wanted to transfer the funds. However, her story changed when investigators presented a recording of her conversation, and she admitted to calling the bank. Despite this, she continued to deny any involvement in her mother and younger sister's deaths. Investigators uncovered further evidence that Megan was responsible for the deaths of her mother and sister, and that she staged the incident to make it appear that Helen had killed their mother before ending her life. According to the investigators, Megan's motivation was jealousy. She felt that her mother favored her younger sister, which had troubled her throughout her life. When their wealthy and successful mother offered to buy Helen her own house, but refused to do the same for Megan, this left Megan feeling depressed and hopeless. Consumed by envy, resentment, and a desire for money, she was driven to commit these acts. The police believe that Megan had premeditated a double murder. 2 days before the incident, she spoke about suspicious men in their neighborhood, seemingly to explain the presence of the weapon in her home. Megan contacted the police to report the presence of strangers in the area. She also said that many other neighbors had similar concerns. On November 9, 2018, nearly a year and a half after Pamela and Helen's deaths, Megan was arrested at her new home in West Virginia, which she had purchased following the incident. The police held a morning press conference to announce her arrest. Detectives from the Serious Crimes Unit stated that Megan faced 2 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of using a weapon during the commission of the murders. Detective Brian Byerson reported that during a search of Megan's apartment, investigators uncovered crucial evidence, including a spreadsheet containing bank details and account passwords. These details were originally found in Pamela's house, but later vanished under mysterious circumstances. Megan has now appeared in court to face charges for the murders of her younger sister and mother. The final hearings in this controversial case occurred in March 2022. Alongside a significant amount of circumstantial evidence gathered by the prosecutors, one key factor in securing a conviction was the compelling testimony of Carlos Gutierrez. Carlos struggled to control his emotions as he continued his testimony. He explained that he asked Helen to leave the house, but she expressed concern for her niece Molly, who was also inside. Carlos could hear the fear in her voice over the phone, realizing how terrified she was in that moment. During subsequent calls, Helen mentioned that she could hear her mother, Pamela, dying. It seemed that Helen was following Carlos's advice to hide in a safe place, but when Carlos tried to reach her an hour later, she did not answer. Worried, he called 911 to report the situation. However, since he was in Texas, the operator informed him that they needed to contact local authorities first. After multiple calls to different numbers, Carlos finally managed to report that someone had died at the specified address and that he feared for Helen's safety. The prosecutor's office reported that Megan attacked Helen at 1 p.m. Around 1:15 p.m., Megan took Helen's phone and pretended to be her to reassure Carlos, claiming that she was fine. Ashley, the middle sister who was pregnant, also testified. She expressed regret that her son would grow up without knowing his grandmother and aunt, and that she could never have imagined that a killer was in their home. Megan's defense maintained that Helen was the one who killed Pamela and then ended her life, insisting that Megan was innocent. They argued that the police initially accepted this version, stating that Helen attacked their mother in the head after becoming upset when her mother changed her mind about buying her a house. After 13 days of trial, on March 28, 2022, Megan Hargan, who is 39 years old, was found guilty of murdering her mother, Pamela Hargan, and her younger sister, Helen Hargan, on July 14, 2017. The jury recommended a sentence of 20 years to life in prison for each murder. During the sentencing hearing in October, the judge sentenced Megan to 2 life terms in prison, following the jury's recommendations. However, on November 9, 2022, a judge overturned her double murder conviction due to juror misconduct. This decision was made after it was discovered that one juror attempted to recreate how Helen might have ended her life. The prosecutor announced plans to retry Megan for the crimes, and she remains in custody awaiting the new trial. In September 2023, Megan Hargan was tried and convicted a second time for the murder of her mother and younger sister. She was sentenced to life in prison in January 2024. After the verdict was announced, a trembling Megan leaned on her lawyer for support, while her younger sister Ashley burst into tears. Other family members of the Hargan family, present in the courtroom, embraced each other and wept after the trial. Ashley chose not to comment and preferred to keep her future plans private. Megan and her husband have divorced, and their daughter is now living with her father in West Virginia. This case highlights how jealousy and conflict among siblings can escalate if not addressed early. Such tensions can arise from minor issues and may grow into deep-seated animosity, threatening the bonds between children and parents. While you can't control everything in life, leaving your safety to chance is a dangerous gamble. On the night of April 25, 1990, several motorists were driving near a motel on a remote stretch of road in Oklahoma City when they noticed scattered women's belongings lying across the asphalt. Curious, they stopped and found a young blonde woman face down on the roadside, convulsing. Emergency services were called immediately, and she was rushed to the hospital. Doctors initially concluded she had been the victim of a hit-and-run collision. By the next day, the unidentified woman remained in intensive care. She had suffered a closed head injury and was placed on medication to reduce brain swelling. That afternoon, an older man arrived, introducing himself as Clarence Marcus Hughes, claiming he was her husband. He said they lived in Tulsa, several hours away, and that his wife, whom he called Tanya, worked as a dancer, but Clarence's demeanor immediately raised suspicions, as did the old bruises on Tanya's body, injuries clearly inflicted long before the supposed accident. Then, despite the efforts of the staff, Tanya passed away on April 30, just days before her 21st birthday. Friends from the dance club where she worked were saddened by her death. They reached out to who they thought was her mother to express their sympathy. However, the woman revealed a shocking truth. Her biological daughter had died 20 years ago, at 18 months old, and she'd never had other children. Everyone was baffled by this information. Tanya's co-workers knew her only as a bright young woman who read constantly and dreamed of going to school. Her husband, Clarence, was controlling and strict, keeping both her and their son, Michael Anthony Hughes, under tight watch. He refused to let Tanya take the boy out alone. People frequently noticed the bruises on her body. Whenever asked, she blamed clumsiness, a fall here, a bump there, excuses that grew less believable each time. Many suspected Clarence was abusing her, though Tanya always denied it. Only a few close friends knew she desperately wanted to escape him but feared for her son's safety. In that context, when she died, suspicions immediately shifted toward Clarence. Authorities questioned whether such a controlling man was fit to care for a 2-year-old. On May 1, 1990, Child Protective Services took Michael into emergency custody, placing him temporarily with foster parents Merle and Ernest Bean. The Beans immediately noticed disturbing behavior. The little boy could not tolerate being told no and would erupt into violent tantrums. He has strange habits, like drinking milk from Pepsi cans and banging his head on the floor. Despite this, they were determined to help him. They gradually changed his habits, taught him structure, and helped him learn to drink milk from a cup. Gradually, Michael became calmer and more secure, but every scheduled meeting with Clarence triggered a dramatic shift. The child would panic, hide under furniture, and cry that he didn't want to see the bad man. Although Clarence had been granted supervised visitation while attempting to regain custody, each interaction made the Beans more uneasy. Eventually, they demanded a paternity test. The results were unequivocal. Clarence was not Michael's biological father. His visitation rights were revoked immediately. A huge relief for the foster family, but the danger had only begun. Within a week of Clarence losing visitation, Merle noticed cars slowing as they passed her home. Always the same vehicle, always creeping by, as if someone were watching the house. She reported it to the police, telling them the man behind the wheel looked exactly like Clarence. Officers ran the plate. It was registered to him. Even though this confirmation was worrying, her concerns were ignored, and no one questioned the man who was unwilling to accept losing access to the boy. On September 12, 1994, after more than 4 years in the care of Merle and Ernest Bean, and just as they was nearing full legal custody, an event occurred. At the time, 6-year-old Michael Anthony Hughes was a first grader at Choctaw Elementary School in Choctaw, Oklahoma. That morning, a man identifying himself as Clarence Hughes walked into the school, armed with a gun. He confronted the principal, James Davis, pointed a gun at him, and threatened to kill him at any resistance. He forced the principal to remove Michael from the classroom. The three left the school using James's pickup truck. Clarence drove them to a remote wooded area outside of town, where he handcuffed James to a tree and wrapped his mouth, face, in duct tape. Then he fled with Michael in a stolen vehicle. James was found approximately 4 hours later by passers-by who alerted law enforcement. The FBI immediately launched a federal kidnapping investigation, focusing on Clarence Hughes, the man who insisted he was Michael's father. But investigators soon uncovered something alarming. After the death of his wife, Tanya, Clarence had applied for Social Security benefits using a number belonging to a man named Franklin Delano Floyd. Agents discovered that over the years, this man had used multiple aliases, including Trenton Davis, Warren Marshall, and now Clarence Marcus Hughes. His criminal history was extensive and violent. In 1962, Floyd had kidnapped a 4-year-old girl in Georgia, taken her into the woods, and abused her. He was sentenced to 10 to 20 years in prison. Later that year, he was transferred to a Georgia state hospital for psychiatric evaluation. In early 1963, while being transported for a medical appointment, he escaped custody, fled to Macon, and robbed a bank before being recaptured. Floyd was paroled in 1972, but just months later, in early 1973, he again attacked a woman and attempted to assault her. She managed to escape. Floyd was arrested but made bail, and by June he had disappeared. A warrant was issued, but despite an active search, he remained a fugitive for over 2 decades. Now, with a kidnapped child in his hands, the urgency to find him skyrocketed. Investigators also began to re-examine the suspicious death of the woman Floyd had been living with, Tanya. Although her autopsy listed her injuries as caused by a hit-and-run accident, Agents now suspected she might have been fleeing Floyd, and that he had murdered her. As part of the public appeal for leads, media outlets began broadcasting Tanya's photo across the country. A few days later, a woman named Jenny Fisher contacted the FBI. She claimed she recognized the woman in the broadcasts, her best friend from high school in Forest Park, Georgia. The woman's name wasn't Tanya Hughes at all. She was Suzanne Marie Savakis, also known as Sharon, and the man calling himself her husband was actually her stepfather. Known to Jenny by the name Warren Marshall, Jenny described Sharon as a brilliant, kind, outgoing girl, a top reserve officers training corps student, a science club member, and part of the gifted program. Sharon had earned a full scholarship to Georgia Tech and dreamed of becoming an aerospace engineer. But one day, Sharon called Jenny sobbing. She was pregnant. She said the child's father demanded she give up the baby and had forbidden her from going to college. Jenny remembered Warren as a frightening controlling presence, someone who openly hit Sharon even when others were watching. Sharon always said her mother died in a car accident when she was in second grade. Jenny also revealed other deeply disturbing details. Once, when visiting Sharon's home, she noticed a drawer full of lingerie, items no teenage girl living without a mother would have bought herself. Sharon admitted quietly that her father bought them for her. Jenny didn't fully understand the implications at the time. But now, with the knowledge of Franklin Delano, Floyd's identity and history, the horrifying truth snapped into place. Jenny had slept over at the Marshall's house, but only once. She noticed that Sharon's room had a curtain instead of a door. As they were getting ready for bed in their pajamas, the father ran into the room with a gun and ordered the classmate to lie down on the floor and put a pillow over her head. At gunpoint, he abused his daughter, Sharon. The next morning, Sharon explained that this was a common occurrence in their household. Jenny was so frightened that she never returned to the house and, until then, hadn't told anyone about the sleepover. Investigators now began gathering information about Sharon's life history. It was known that she was born on September 6, 1969. However, Franklin Delano Floyd was incarcerated during this period, ruling out the possibility that he was Sharon's biological father. Given that the perpetrator had previously kidnapped a child, it was assumed he had abducted Sharon at a young age. This meant she had been under his care for at least 15 years before her death. Floyd was still on the run. FBI agents suggested he might return to the state where he obtained his driver's license to renew it. It worked. Floyd was soon spotted in Louisville, Kentucky. On November 10, 1994, FBI agents went to his address. The 51-year-old suspect was located, surrounded, and detained. However, Michael was not with him. Neighbors stated they had never seen any children around him. When detectives asked him about the boy's whereabouts, he replied that Michael was alive, had been left with a wealthy man who was looking after him, and that he would be fine. Of course, this was considered a lie, especially since he couldn't even name the guardian. No one believed the child was still alive. It was clear that winning a murder case without a body would be very difficult. The search continued. This dangerous repeat offender urgently needed to be locked up and isolated from society. Franklin Delano Floyd was charged with kidnapping, possession of a firearm, car theft, and a long list of other crimes. The school principal, James Davis, testified at the trial, provided incriminating testimony against Floyd. He was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 52 years in prison without parole. Agents discovered that the principal's pickup truck had been found abandoned in Texas a month after Michael's abduction. In 1995, a mechanic from Kansas purchased the car at auction, began repairing it. He disassembled the car and found a large envelope hidden between the body and the top of the gas tank. Inside were 97 shocking photographs of girls, children, and women in explicit poses, including one of Sharon at approximately 4 or 5 years old. There was also an image of an unidentified young woman who had sustained such severe injuries that investigators presumed her dead. However, her identity remained unknown. Most of the women in these images had distinct tan lines. It was assumed they all lived in warm, sunny areas. On March 29, 1995, a road crew discovered skeletal human remains in Pinellas County, Florida. A 4-day search recovered 90% of the skeleton, a breast implant, clothing, and jewelry. The deceased could not be identified initially. However, it was obvious she was the victim of a violent crime. As her skull was fractured, there were 2 bullet holes in the back of her head. A year after the remains were discovered, the FBI provided investigators with an image of the unidentified woman from Lloyd's photos. Examining the photo, they noticed a shirt wrapped around her neck that matched an item of clothing found with the skeletal remains. Dental records then allowed them to identify the victim as Cheryl Ann Comesso, who had disappeared in 1989. Investigators discovered that before her disappearance, Cheryl worked as a dancer at a club in Tampa. Her colleagues and acquaintances revealed that she was a close friend of Sharon and spent a lot of time with Sharon and her father, Warren. Everyone who knew Warren warned Cheryl to stay away from him. Cheryl was aware of rumors about Warren and Sharon's relationship, but she didn't confirm them until much later. One of the dancers from the club, a woman named Heather Lane, agreed to cooperate fully with investigators. She recalled an unsettling incident from 1988, when the dancers were hired to perform at a private party. Everyone understood that no intimate contact was allowed. But that night, Heather saw Sharon quietly offering intimate services for $50. Alarmed, she pulled Sharon aside. Sharon admitted her father had ordered her to do it, that he needed the money, and that he had even bought her condoms beforehand. Heather had long heard disturbing rumors about the Marshalls, but seeing this with her own eyes confirmed her worst fears. She was horrified and deeply shaken. Not long after, Sharon became pregnant and later gave birth to Michael. Motherhood transformed her. She adored the baby and often told close friends that having Michael was the greatest blessing of her life. Yet she never revealed who the child's father was. One night in 1989, Heather saw Warren in his pickup truck outside the club, shouting aggressively at Cheryl Ann Comesso. The two were in a heated argument, and Warren openly threatened to kill her. Heather considered intervening, but Warren warned he would run her over if she didn't walk away. Cheryl eventually climbed into his truck. She vanished soon after. Cheryl was only 18 years old when she disappeared in April 1989. Weeks later, her bright red Corvette was found abandoned near Brandon, Florida. The search turned up nothing. Shortly after Cheryl's disappearance, Sharon and Warren abruptly fled Tampa. A neighbor later reported watching their trailer explode soon after they left. Investigators eventually concluded they had set fire to the trailer to destroy evidence after Cheryl's murder, which authorities believed was committed by Warren. Soon, both changed their names. Sharon began calling herself Tanya, and Warren adopted the identity Clarence Marcus Hughes. Investigators would later learn the names were pulled from gravestones the pair had seen in Alabama. To further complicate things, the two stopped in Louisiana and legally married, allowing Sharon, now Tonya, to take the surname Hughes. In 2001, while Floyd was awaiting trial for the murder of Comesso, Judge Nancy Lay ruled that he was incompetent to stand trial and ordered him to undergo an additional psychiatric evaluation. Floyd challenged the evaluation, asserting that he was competent. A few months later, the judge reversed the earlier ruling and ordered Floyd to stand trial. He was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. In 2002, journalist Matt Birkbeck stumbled upon a missing persons photograph of a young girl sitting on the lap of a man believed to be her father. Instantly, Matt recognized her as Sharon, Suzanne Marie Savakis. Shocked by the tragic complexity of her life, he decided to investigate further. Wanting answers, he requested an interview with Franklin Delano Floyd in prison. When they met, Floyd seemed eager to tell his own version of events. He claimed he was born in 1943, raised in an orphanage after his father died, and abused throughout his childhood. He denied all wrongdoing, insisting Sharon had always stayed with him willingly and that he had left Michael with a wealthy man who would care for him. Matt didn't believe a word of it. But the interview became material for his first book in 2004. Still, many crucial questions remained unanswered. To Matt, one truth was obvious. Floyd was deeply disturbed. His second book, published in 2008, brought renewed public attention to the case. Online communities began to speculate about Sharon's origins, who she really was, and from whom she might have been stolen. Then came a turning point. Back in 2005, Matt had received a letter from a young woman asking whether her DNA could help identify Sharon. Her name was Megan Dufresne, and she was Sharon's biological daughter. Megan had been adopted at birth. Only in high school did she stumble across Matt's book and begin to suspect the horrifying truth about her mother's past. The more she learned, the more devastated and enraged she became. Everything Sharon had suffered, kidnapping, abuse, isolation, had shaped the life of a mother Megan never got to know. For most of her life, Megan believed her biological mother had died in a car accident. Only later did she learn the truth. In 1989, Tanya gave birth to a daughter while living in New Orleans. The daughter was put up for adoption. Her name was Megan. When Megan took a DNA test in 2010 hoping to find relatives, investigators made a startling discovery. Her biological mother had given birth at least 3 times. The first child was born while Sharon was still in high school, but nothing was known about his fate. Then came Michael in 1988, and finally Megan in 1989. The identities of all 3 fathers remain unknown. Some believe Sharon may have had a boyfriend in school, but many also suspected Floyd himself might be the father, though DNA testing proved Michael was not biologically related to him. In 2011, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children joined the investigation. Working alongside an FBI agent, they arranged a meeting with Franklin Delano Floyd in hopes of finally learning the truth about the children. But Floyd was a pathological liar. Getting reliable information from him seemed almost impossible. In 2014, 2 FBI agents visited Floyd in prison. They began by attempting to identify Sharon, but he rambled, misidentified them as lawyers, and complained endlessly. When they revealed they were with the FBI, he suddenly changed course, insisting he wanted Michael's case closed. Then, in a jarring emotional shift, Floyd began to cry, abruptly stopped, and claimed he had shot the boy twice in the back of the head to end his suffering. According to Floyd, he had kidnapped Michael to raise him as his own. But the child became uncontrollable the very day of the abduction. Instead of returning him, Floyd said he killed him near the Oklahoma-Texas border. Merle and Ernest Bean, the couple who had cared for Michael for 4 years and considered him their son, were devastated. Searches were conducted in March 2015 around the area Floyd described, but the land was vast, and wild boars, known to consume bone, roamed the region. Investigators hoped to find shell casings or clothing, but nothing was recovered. With no remains found, detectives turned their attention back to the truth behind Sharon's identity. During further questioning, Floyd launched into a bizarre monologue about being the most handsome bus driver in North Carolina, claiming that was how he met a woman named Sandra Frances Brandenburg in 1974. At the time, Sandy was a single mother of 4 children in a desperate situation. Floyd said he introduced himself as Brandon Williams, one of many aliases he used. According to his story, Sharon was actually Suzanne Marie Savakis, Sandra Frances Brandenburg's missing eldest daughter. Agents began verifying this claim nearly 40 years after the abduction. Both Sandra and her ex-husband, Clifford Ray Savakis, were still alive and able to provide crucial details. Suzanne had been born in Livonia, Michigan, on September 6, 1969. Her father, Clifford, was drafted into the Vietnam War and first met his daughter when she was 6 months old. When he returned home, he and Sandra eventually separated. Sandra remarried and raised her children in a trailer. Struggling with poverty for years, their already difficult life worsened when a tornado destroyed their home, leaving Sandra traumatized and overwhelmed. When she sought assistance from social services, she was informed she risked losing custody of her children. Clifford, only 23 at the time, tried to help, but he too was facing financial hardship. So when Sandra met Brandon Williams, he appeared to be a blessing, at least at first. Initially, he was supportive and even helped her retain custody of her children. But shortly after they married, his behavior turned dark. He who had once seemed protective became paranoid and violent. He would grab a knife and stalk Sandra through the house, insisting she could never leave him, even when there was no hint of separation. And within months, he kidnapped her children, changing their lives forever. Continued to struggle financially. One day, in desperation, Sandra used a counterfeit check to buy groceries. She was arrested and spent a month in jail. While she was incarcerated, her children remained in the custody of her husband. But when Sandy was released, she returned home to find the house empty. Panicked, she contacted the police. After learning the children had been taken by their stepfather, officers told her they couldn't intervene because, in the eyes of the law, the man had parental rights. A long search eventually led authorities to 2 of the missing girls, Allison and Amy, who had been left at a local church. But Suzanne and Philip were gone. Their whereabouts remained a mystery for decades. Floyd had fled Texas with Suzanne, first taking her to Oklahoma. When she entered elementary school there, she was enrolled under her real name. 9 years later, they moved again, this time to Georgia, where she became known as Sharon or Suzanne Marshall. It wasn't until June 3, 2017, that her tombstone was finally corrected to reflect her true identity, Suzanne Marie Savakis. Years later, after becoming a mother herself, Sharon's daughter, Megan Dufresne, named her firstborn son Michael, honoring the half-brother she never got to meet. Then, on March 7, 2019, author Matt Birkbeck received a message from a man in North Carolina named Stevie. Stevie explained that after his father's death, his mother confessed the truth about his past. She showed him documents revealing that his real name was Philip Brandenburg. Stevie's adoptive mother told him that decades earlier, a nervous young woman named Sandra had appeared at her home, holding a little boy. Sandra said she was leaving town with her new husband and her other children, and could not care for him. In the distance, the woman remembered seeing a tense, quiet man, Franklin Delano Floyd, watching. In February 2020, a DNA test confirmed what investigators had long suspected. Stevie is Philip Brandenburg, Sandra's biological son and Suzanne's younger brother. As for Franklin Delano Floyd, he lived far longer than many believed he deserved. On January 23, 2023, at the age of 79, he died of natural causes at the Ryford Correctional Facility in Florida, never having faced the death penalty. To this day, he is believed to have been responsible for the deaths of Suzanne, Michael, and possibly other unknown victims. Michael's body has never been found. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case, the case of Cassie Jo Stoddart. We will explore the tragic story of Cassie Jo Stoddart, a high school senior from Pocatello, Idaho, whose murder was influenced by the movie Scream. Let's go back to 2006, when the Scream franchise was at its peak. Even though the first film was released in 1996, long before Cassie's murder. Cassie was an honor student at her high school in Pocatello. She attended classes with her boyfriend, Matt Beckham, and her friends, Brian Draper and Tori Adamczyk, and they often spent their free time together. Cassie was a beautiful young girl with long, flowing dark hair, embodying both beauty and intelligence. In a 2016 interview with Idaho Magazine, Cassie's brother Andrew Stoddart described her as artistic, with a passion for drawing and music. She was a great role model and a typical girl. Cassie's classmates and friends, Brian and Tori, were very interested in the horror movie Scream and other similar films. They also enjoyed making their own videos, with Brian often filming Cassie. Eventually, Brian and Tori began recording discussions about murders. In one recording, Brian said, "We've already found a victim, and maybe it's our girl. You know, we need a sacrifice, and we have to go for it. She will be the first on the list. She'll be all alone in a big dark house." This particular video was filmed on September 2, 2006, and the audio was later found on a videotape that was given to the police, along with other evidence for the murder case. Brian's lawyer argued that this tape should be disregarded since the friends were merely creating a horror film. That night, Cassie was supposed to stay home to care for her aunt and uncle's pets while they were away on business. She invited her boyfriend Matt over to watch movies and keep her company to avoid feeling bored and lonely. Cassie's mother had prohibited her from bringing guests over, but she still told Matt to come. Later on, Brian and Tori showed up, even though she hadn't invited them. They all chatted together and took her uncle's dogs for a walk to keep them calm. To minimize noise, Cassie eventually locked the dogs in a room and the boys started goofing around. At one point, Brian and Tori decided to leave the house where Matt and Cassie were and go to the movie theater instead of watching Kill Bill 2. According to court records from the 6th Judicial District Court of Idaho, they got into Tori's red car and drove away. They stopped alongside the road to park, then got out to change into dark pants, shirts, gloves, and white masks. Both of them also grabbed large knives. Afterward, they drove back and parked near the house again. Dressed in their costumes and armed with knives, they walked down the driveway toward the house. To enter, they broke a basement window. Once inside, Brian and Tori began making noise by stomping and banging, trying to lure Cassie and Matt downstairs to scare them. They created chaos by throwing objects and breaking things. Then, they found the circuit box and switched off the lights in the house. After some time, they turned the lights back on, but Cassie and Matt still did not come downstairs. Meanwhile, they heard that Matt's mother had arrived to take him home. At 10:30 p.m., Matt started to feel uneasy, claiming that something strange was happening with the lights in the house. His mother suggested that Cassie spend the night at their place, but Cassie declined, saying she needed to take the dogs out early. Matt left with his mother, leaving Cassie alone. Once he was gone, the guys turned off the electricity again and went back upstairs. At the top of the stairs, Brian opened a closet door to make noise and scare Cassie. Meanwhile, the dogs were growling behind a door in the room as Brian and Tori entered the living room, where Cassie was lying on the couch. When she saw them, she jumped up and asked who they were. Tori moved in front of Brian and approached Cassie, who shouted that she wasn't scared of them and could handle them herself. Brian heard Cassie's screams and saw Tori raise a knife and attack her multiple times. She collapsed to the floor, making a gurgling sound. Tori turned to Brian and said, "I know what I did. We have to kill her." He then stabbed Cassie several more times. "I just killed Cassie. This isn't a joke. I stabbed her in the throat and I watched her lifeless body fall. I killed her." It all felt surreal to Brian, but everything happened so quickly. "We need to act fast," he said to Tori as they were in the car. Tori and Brian were celebrating, shouting, "We did it. It was so easy." The group in Tori's car visited his house, but didn't stay long. They first entered the garage, where they took blue garbage bags. After removing their costumes, they packed the costumes and knives into the bags and changed into pre-prepared street clothes. They also grabbed a bottle of liquid and placed everything in the back seat of Tori's car before leaving the garage. On their way, they bought matches and drove to Black Rock Canyon. There, they went down a trail to try to burn the bag containing the costumes and knives. However, the liquid wasn't very flammable, so the items wouldn't catch fire. As a result, Tori and Brian dug a hole and buried everything, covering it with branches. Afterward, they drove around the area for a while before returning to Tori's house to watch a movie. Cassie's aunt and uncle, Allison and Frank Contreras, returned on September 24. When she hadn't heard from her daughter at the expected time and hadn't received a call, Cassie's mother went to their house soon after. Frank, Cassie's uncle, came out to meet her mother and wouldn't let her inside because Cassie's body had been found on the living room floor, with dried blood around it. The police were called and they advised not to touch anything. When the officers arrived, they took the body for examination and began their investigation. They discovered that the intruders had broken a window to enter through the basement, which was in disarray, and the electrical panel was open, raising further questions. There were 2 Dobermans locked in separate rooms. If they had been nearby, they would have prevented anyone from getting close to the girl. This raises the question of why Cassie locked them up, as a stranger would not have been able to do so. The autopsy showed that Cassie died from multiple stab wounds, 26 in total, with at least 9 being fatal. These wounds impacted her heart, lungs, and liver, leaving her with no chance of survival. It was determined that 2 different knives were used in the attack, suggesting the involvement of 2 assailants. There was no evidence of abuse assault, and her death occurred overnight between September 22 and 23. The first person questioned was Cassie's boyfriend, Matt. He explained that on the evening of September 22, he was at Cassie's house when Brian and Tori arrived. However, after an hour, they grew bored and left. On September 23, Matt attempted to contact Cassie by phone but received no response. He was unable to visit her house to check on her because he lacked transportation. His family had only 1 car, which his mother took to work. Matt found out about Cassie's murder on Sunday, September 24, when Cassie's mother called him to ask what he had done with her daughter. Matt thought that Brian and Tori treated Cassie well and might have even had feelings for her, as they sometimes flirted. During a detailed interrogation with Tori on September 24 at his home, where his parents were present, Tori stated that he and Brian had gone to a party with Cassie and Matt. However, since no one else showed up, they decided to leave her and Matt alone, and they went to the movie. When asked for more details, Tori could not recall any specifics about the movie they claimed to have watched, only mentioning that after the movie, he and Brian returned home. The following day, the police interviewed Brian with his mother present. Brian's version of events that evening closely matched Tori's. They left Cassie to go to the cinema, but like Tori, Brian couldn't recall the plot of the movie they supposedly watched 2 days earlier. He expressed distress upon hearing about Cassie's death and had trouble accepting that she was gone. When officers spoke with the cinema attendant, she confirmed that neither Tori nor Brian had actually been to the movie, as she recognized them and would have remembered their presence. This prompted the police to take a closer look at the friends. On September 25, the detective interviewed an anonymous individual at a high school, which revealed the following information. Tori and Brian had a strong fascination with knives, guns, and horror movies. They were so passionate about these films that they even wrote a screenplay centered around a murder. The witness reported that Cassie had asked her friends to film her for this project, and about 2 months prior, Tori had allowed Cassie to read the script. Tori expressed his enjoyment of movies like Scream and Friday the 13th, and he owned a collection of knives stored in his bedroom closet. Additionally, he had created a glove similar to the one seen in A Nightmare on Elm Street. The witness also noted that Tori bragged about being capable of committing the perfect crime, attributing this confidence to his extensive viewing of murder films and his habit of taking notes on evading capture. At school, Tory would often joke around by pretending to hit others and simulating throat-cutting gestures. On September 22, 2006, Tory had invited this witness to Cassie's party, but she declined. Furthermore, the police found out that Tory had been in love with Cassie for the past 2 to 3 years. On September 27, 2006, Brian and Tory were arrested and charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Although they were minors at the time, they were charged as adults. During the interrogation, Tory broke down in tears and confessed that Brian was responsible for the crime. In response, Brian accused Tory, claiming Brian was present at the scene but did not take part. He insisted that their intention was only to scare Cassie, not to kill her. However, Brian later admitted that he had struck Cassie at Tory's command. He also led investigators to the locations where they burned their costumes and buried the unburned items. The police excavated the area and discovered 2 masks, clothing, shoes, and knives. Tory and Brian had removed their socks and buried everything since the clothing and shoes were covered in blood. They had planned to change outfits beforehand. Most notably, the police found a videotape at the bottom of the pit that provided undeniable evidence of the crime. The 40-minute recording showed Tory and Brian painting masks they had bought from a store. Later in the video, they recorded a message to future serial killers, wishing them success and discussing their plans to target Cassie and her boyfriend, Matt. Fortunately, Matt's mother insisted he go home that day, which ultimately saved him. The tape also featured an interview that Tory conducted with Cassie and Matt on the afternoon of September 22, during which he indicated on screen that the two would soon be killed. Additionally, during a search of Tory's house, the police found a red notebook containing notes about planning a murder, as well as a list of 20 people that Brian and Tory intended to kill over the next 2 years, targeting one person each month. As investigators looked into the individuals on the list, they discovered that it included teachers, friends, girlfriends, and even a relative. The police were startled to uncover the connections these potential victims had with Tory and Brian, as most of these relationships appeared normal. Many people were shocked to learn that they were being targeted for murder. It's important to note that Tory and Brian did not fit the mold of typical victims of bullying or abuse. They seemed perfectly normal. Brian Draper was found guilty on April 17, 2007, and Tory Adamczyk was found guilty on June 8, 2007. On August 21, 2007, both received mandatory life sentences without the possibility of parole for first-degree murder, and an additional 30 years for conspiracy to commit murder. They began serving their sentences in a correctional facility in Idaho. The verdict upset the families of both Tory and Brian, who had hoped for leniency due to their young ages. Tory's relatives were especially outraged. In 2010, the attorneys for Brian and Tory filed separate appeals to the state Supreme Court, but both were denied. Tory's family continued to seek changes to his sentence for over a decade. Ultimately, in 2017, Tory Adamczyk lost the final court case that could have affected his sentence, ensuring that both Tory and Brian would spend the rest of their lives in prison. A suburban house has been transformed into a place of horror, with bloodstains splattered all over the walls. The most haunting detail is the tiny fingerprint of a child that remains. This was the sight that greeted Jennifer O'Brien when she entered her parents' home to retrieve her son, Nathan. The case was so macabre and deeply disturbing that many struggled to accept it as reality. Regardless, it happened, and the whole country would soon be watching the investigation that followed. This story brings us to Park Hill, a neighborhood located within the city of Calgary, Alberta, Canada, known for its tranquil atmosphere and the warmth of its local residents. Park Hill offers a picturesque environment with well-maintained homes, tree-lined streets, modern infrastructure, and a welcoming sense of community. The area radiates calm, stability, making it a highly desirable place for families seeking peace and security. These qualities were precisely what drew the Lickneys family to settle in here. Alvin Lickness, a beloved father and grandfather, was 66 years old at the time. He was a man of authority, respect, both within his family and throughout his professional life. With retirement approaching, Alvin eagerly looked forward to beginning a new chapter, one filled with freedom after years of responsibility. His wife, Kathy Lickness, aged 53, was the heart of the family. She was not only a devoted wife but also her daughter's closest confidant. Her caring and nurturing nature allowed her to create a warm, inviting home for everyone she loved. Park Hill had been their home for many years, but they had recently decided it was time to downsize. They were preparing for a move to Edmonton, planning a more modest living arrangement as they entered retirement. Alvin and Kathy stood on the threshold of enjoying this long-awaited stage of life. They listed their house for sale, along with several pieces of furniture and household items. Their daughter, Jennifer O'Brien, visited her parents' home one final time with her children, including her cheerful 5-year-old son, Nathan. In just 1 week, her parents were scheduled to leave this house permanently. Jennifer felt a quiet sadness. This was the place where she grew up and spent her childhood with her siblings. Alvin and Kathy had also secured an apartment in Mazatlan, Mexico, where they planned to spend the winter enjoying the warm sun before eventually moving on to Edmonton. But they would never have the chance to enjoy their golden years. Just 1 day later, their hopes and plans vanished into a nightmare that engulfed everything around them. Nathan O'Brien was a lively child with a cherubic face, perpetually tousled, sun-kissed hair. He was the middle child among Jennifer's 3 children. Known for his love of superhero costumes and his friendly, outgoing nature, Nathan was adored by nearly everyone he met. He easily made friends with both children and adults. Nathan possessed an endless curiosity for the world around him, always eager to explore something new. Jennifer and the children spent a pleasant day at the family home in Park Hill. As the evening approached and darkness settled in, Jennifer decided to stay a little longer rather than drive immediately with 3 tired children. Nathan, worn out from playing outdoors, fell asleep almost instantly. At approximately 11 o'clock p.m., Jennifer decided to take her other children home, leaving Nathan asleep beside his grandmother. With plans to return for him in the morning, Nathan had long wished to spend the night with his grandparents, and Jennifer didn't want to deny him that simple joy. On the morning of June 30, 2014, Jennifer arrived at her parents' home to pick up her son, unaware that she was about to witness something beyond comprehension. The front door was standing wide open. As she cautiously looked inside, she saw pools of blood, and a heavy, metallic odor filled the air. Blood appeared everywhere. On the beds, the walls, the floors, and throughout the hallway. A dark trail of sneaker prints and smeared, bloody streaks suggested that someone had been dragged through the house. The most devastating sight of all was a small child's handprint pressed against the wall, as if the boy had leaned on it to steady himself. Jennifer couldn't find her parents or her 5-year-old son anywhere in the house. She immediately called her husband, telling him she believed her entire family had been killed and their bodies taken away. Shaking and overwhelmed, Jennifer then dialed emergency services and repeated the same message. The dispatcher instructed her to return to her car and lock the doors immediately, in case the person responsible was still inside the house or nearby. Jennifer sat behind the steering wheel, staring at the home where she had spent so many happy moments with her family. The image of the small handprint on the wall replayed endlessly in her mind. Police officers arrived quickly and entered the house. They conducted a thorough search of every room, but no bodies were found. Alvin and Kathy Lickness, along with little Nathan, had vanished without a trace. An Amber Alert was soon issued. Despite the horrific condition of the house, investigators held on to hope that the three had been abducted and were being held somewhere alive. Law enforcement officers collected DNA samples throughout the Lickness home but initially found no fingerprints or DNA belonging to an obvious suspect. During the forensic examination, investigators discovered a tooth inside the residence, believed to belong to Alvin Lickness. Blood found on a pair of heavy dumbbells in the garage was later confirmed to match his DNA. Investigators also noted that a lock on a side door had been damaged, suggesting that the attacker may have entered the house that way during the night. Police questioned approximately 200 people who had attended the estate sale held at the home shortly before the disappearance, as hundreds of officers searched tirelessly for the missing family and found no trace of them anywhere. Investigators were forced to return to the starting point, the Lickness home. Detectives considered the possibility that Nathan may have witnessed something terrifying and tried to hide. They carefully searched every closet, storage space, and area beneath the beds, anywhere a frightened child might conceal himself, but found nothing. For weeks, police continued to believe that Alvin, Kathy, and Nathan might be alive somewhere, and that the injuries sustained in the home might not have been fatal. As time passed, however, that hope began to fade. Despite extensive searches, no bodies were found. It became increasingly clear that this was not a kidnapping but a brutal attack on three members of the same family. The person responsible remained at large, Nathan's parents, unwilling to accept the possibility that their son had passed away, contacted him directly through televised appeals. They reminded Nathan that he was a superhero, telling him he was brave, strong, and could handle anything. They promised they would find him and bring him home. Jennifer, speaking through tears, begged her son not to be afraid. The people watching her desperate request were touched. They didn't know for sure if the child was still alive. The public shared in the family's anguish, feeling profound sympathy but powerless to help. The Amber Alert failed to produce any immediate, concrete results. Over the course of several days, police received more than 1,300 tips from across the region. Residents of nearby homes and businesses did everything they could to assist the investigation, voluntarily submitting hours of surveillance footage recorded during the night in question. Detectives painstakingly reviewed hundreds of hours of video footage, searching for anything out of place. Eventually, something subtle yet troubling emerged. On the night Alvin and Kathy Lickness, along with their 5-year-old grandson Nathan O'Brien, disappeared, a vehicle was seen repeatedly driving through the Park Hill neighborhood. In one frame, a figure appeared lingering near the Lickness residence in the early morning hours. Shortly afterward, a pickup truck was captured traveling north, away from Calgary. In the bed of the truck was a large object concealed beneath a white covering. Police quickly released flyers showing an image of a late 1982 to early 1990s green Ford F-150 pickup truck, believed to have been present on the Lickness Street that night. Investigators were eager to identify both the vehicle and its driver, suspecting they could hold crucial information about the disappearance of Alvin, Kathy, and Nathan. Publicizing the image proved to be a pivotal decision. A woman who recognized the truck contacted authorities. The caller was Patty Douglas, and the truck belonged to her brother, Douglas Garland, 56. Douglas Garland had a long, troubling history. In his youth, he was expelled from medical school after being caught cheating. Over the years, he had been repeatedly arrested for weapons-related offenses and assaults, though charges were often dropped or never pursued, allowing him to evade lasting consequences. In 1992, Douglas was convicted after police discovered a methamphetamine lab on his rural property. To avoid arrest and imprisonment, he fled to British Columbia, where he assumed the identity of a teenager who had died in a car crash. Under this false identity, Douglas lived undetected for several years. working in a laboratory. Later collecting unemployment benefits while concealing his true name. In 2000, authorities uncovered the deception. Douglas was arrested and ultimately sentenced to 6 months in prison for banned substances-related offenses and identity theft. Psychological assessments at the time characterized him as mentally unstable but not prone to violent behavior. Based on those evaluations, he served only his sentence and was released. In July 2014, police detained Douglas Garland once again, this time at a bus stop in Calgary, citing an outstanding charge related to document forgery. Douglas refused to cooperate and provided no information to investigators. Let's get back to the case. Given the fear that the Lickness couple and Nathan might still be alive and in danger, immediate, police authorized an urgent search of Douglas's rural property, invoking an emergency legal exception rather than waiting for a full search warrant. An emergency response team launched what was initially treated as a potential hostage rescue operation, storming the over 16-hectare farm where Douglas lived with his elderly parents. Investigators believed that a rural property offered the greatest opportunity to conceal victims. Despite an intensive search, neither the missing family members nor any bodies were found. One detail, however, drew attention: a barrel near a greenhouse that was still smoldering inside. Officers found only ash, no blood, no identifiable remains, and no immediate physical evidence. With no grounds to hold him at that time, Douglas Garland was released on bail under strict conditions, including an order not to return to the farm. Soon after, police obtained a comprehensive search warrant. More than 300 officers meticulously combed the property, surrounding fields, and nearby wetlands, while forensic specialists focused on the structures themselves. Deep within the basement, investigators uncovered disturbing materials, including books and manuals containing graphic and violent imagery. Further searches revealed boxes filled with restraints, some small enough to fit a child's wrists. Additional items included hacksaw blades, leather straps, bone saws, knives, firearms, even a straitjacket. Authorities also discovered a computer hard drive hidden beneath the rafters in the basement. The hard drive contained an extensive collection of material related to violence. Gathered through meticulous online research, Douglas had downloaded numerous documents and instructions from the internet, including information on how to attack victims in the early morning hours to maximize the element of surprise, descriptions of painful methods of torture, and guides explaining how to kill without experiencing emotional involvement. The hard drive also contained disturbing images related to Douglas's personal obsessions and fantasies. On shelves nearby, investigators found books focused on poisoning and violent crime. Among them were photographs involving adults wearing diapers, with their hands and feet restrained, some appearing unconscious or possibly deceased. Investigators also uncovered a kit designed for impersonating a woman in the basement. It included silicone breast prostheses, 2 long blonde wigs, racks of women's clothing, and an extensive shoe collection consisting of 89 pairs of boots, shoes, sneakers that fit Douglas's feet. One empty shoebox found in the closet drew particular attention. The sole pattern printed on the box could have been compared to an imprint found at the Lickness home, but the corresponding pair of shoes was missing. Meanwhile, Douglas violated the conditions of his release and returned to the farmhouse without notifying Calgary police. Detectives monitoring his movements believed he intended to destroy or conceal evidence hidden in the basement. His second arrest occurred as Douglas attempted to move through dense trees and thick brush, while a police helicopter hovered overhead. He was formally charged with the murders of Nathan O'Brien, Catherine "Kathy" Lickness, and Alvin Lickness. Nearly 2 weeks had passed since their disappearance, and although no bodies had yet been recovered, prosecutors proceeded based on an overwhelming volume of evidence. More than 1,400 individual items collected during the investigation. At that stage, it had not yet been definitively proven that Douglas Garland was the man who carried out the brutal attack on Alvin, Kathy, and Nathan, the investigation continued without pause. Detectives decided to re-examine the contents of a smoldering barrel that had been noticed during the initial search of the farm. As forensic specialists carefully sifted through the ashes, they made a chilling discovery. Among the remains were a child's tooth, charred human tissue, a metal eyeglass frame, and numerous fragments of human bone. A subsequent investigation revealed a layered history between Douglas and the Lickness family, stretching back many years. Patty Douglas, Douglas's sister and the woman who alerted police about the pickup truck, was the common-law wife of Alan Lickness, one of Alvin and Kathy's sons. This family connection drew immediate attention from investigators. It soon emerged that Alvin and Douglas had worked together years earlier. In 2006, Alvin, a successful businessman, was seeking technical assistance for a project, and Alan suggested Douglas as a potential collaborator. Douglas, who possessed some technical knowledge of mechanical engineering, began working with Alvin on the development of an industrial pump for the oil and gas industry. The pump itself was Alvin's invention, and Douglas was hired to help refine, improve certain aspects of the design. However, the project was never commercialized. By early 2007, the working relationship came to an end. After losing his position, Douglas became increasingly resentful. The termination appeared to fuel a deep-seated anger that lingered for years, gradually hardening into bitterness. Investigators think Douglas's anger built up over time until he violently destroyed what he blamed for his humiliation. While there was no evidence that Nathan had been a specific target, authorities believed Douglas was unwilling to leave any witnesses behind. His actions showed no regard for age or innocence. His focus was on revenge. In January 2017, Douglas Garland stood trial in a packed Calgary courtroom, where he pleaded not guilty to 3 counts of first-degree murder. Throughout the proceedings, he filed no motions and remained largely expressionless. The trial drew national attention, becoming one of the most closely followed criminal cases in Canada, as the public struggled to comprehend the brutality of the crime. Just one day before their disappearance, Alvin and Kathy Lickness had held an estate sale at their Park Hill home, preparing to sell the property and downsize. Douglas, who had harbored resentment toward Alvin for years over the failed pump project and the associated patent, appeared to seize this moment. Investigators believe, in the early hours of June 30, 2014, Douglas gained entry to the Lickness home by drilling through the lock on a side door. Instructions on how to defeat such locks were later found on his computer. While the household slept, Douglas went to the master bedroom, where Alvin was resting, and struck him multiple times with a heavy blunt object. He then moved to the guest bedroom, where Kathy and 5-year-old Nathan were sleeping. DNA evidence confirmed that both were attacked there. The extent of blood loss indicated that Kathy also suffered a severe blow from a blunt instrument. The precise cause of Nathan's injuries could not be determined, but forensic evidence clearly showed that he had been bleeding. Despite the extensive bloodshed inside the house, forensic experts concluded that all 3 victims were still alive when Douglas dragged them from their beds and forced them out of the home. Investigators believed he transported them in the back of his pickup truck, bound and concealed beneath a white covering later observed in surveillance footage. No usable fingerprints or DNA belonging to Douglas were found at the residence. Consistent with evidence that he had studied detailed online instructions on how to avoid detection, Douglas then drove the victims to his parents' rural farm near Airdrie, located more than 30 kilometers from the Lickness home. Investigators later determined that Nathan and his grandparents were subjected to extreme violence at the property. DNA belonging to all 3 victims was recovered from multiple tools found on the farm, including meat hooks, bone saws, and knives. Their genetic material was also discovered on the exterior of a pair of rubber boots near one of the outbuildings. Inside that structure, a blood-stained light switch contained DNA matching both Alvin and Kathy Lickness. A forensic computer specialist testified about the discovery of photographs of Kathy and Alvin among deleted files recovered from a hard drive belonging to Douglas. The evidence suggested that Douglas had been monitoring the lives of those he considered his enemies. Likely through publicly available information and social media platforms, Douglas's own mother also took the stand and testified against her son. She described him as a solitary man who had no close friends, though she added that he was intelligent, enjoyed reading, and helped around the family home. She testified that Douglas had earned a Bachelor of Science degree, later enrolled at the University of Alberta, but studied there for only a short period before suffering a nervous breakdown. When she later saw a television report about the disappearance of the Lickness family and mentioned it to Douglas, he reportedly said that he did not want to talk about Alvin. She also stated that she did not hear her son leave the house that night and therefore could not provide specific details about his movements. As expected, the defense argued that there was no direct forensic or scientific evidence placing Douglas Garland inside the Lickness home on the night of the attack. Defense counsel emphasized that no eyewitness had seen Douglas commit the murders and that there was no definitive proof showing how or why the three victims had been killed. According to the defense, the case was built entirely on circumstantial evidence. On February 6, 2017, near the conclusion of the trial, prosecutors presented what they described as a pivotal piece of evidence, one discovered purely by chance. At 9:30 a.m. on July 1, 2014, the day after the attack at the Lickness residence, a small aircraft operated by an aerial mapping company was flying over airspace near Airdrie, Alberta, conducting routine photographic surveys of the area and surrounding communities north of Calgary. The aircraft captured images every 3 seconds and, by extraordinary coincidence, recorded 2 photographs that would later be introduced in court and significantly strengthen the case against Douglas. The images appeared to show 3 human figures lying face down on the ground near several outbuildings south of the main farmhouse. 2 of the figures were clearly adults, unclothed except for white material wrapped around their waists. Experts were able to estimate their approximate heights, one about 6 feet 2 inches, another about 5 feet 6 inches. A third, much smaller figure was visible nearby, lying on its side in the grass close to a burn barrel. The prosecution suggested that the smaller figure was a child. The pilot who operated the aircraft testified that when he flew over the same area approximately 26 hours later, the figures were no longer visible in the photographs. In this tragic case, the silence of the victims spoke volumes. No intact bodies were ever recovered, only fragments. The sole physical confirmation of their deaths was found among the ashes in the burn barrel charred tissue. Bone fragments, and remains belonging to Nathan O'Brien and his grandparents. Investigators concluded that after dismembering the bodies, the killer attempted to destroy them by fire in a crude and prolonged process resembling cremation. As these horrifying details were presented in court, Douglas remained outwardly unmoved, at times appearing to take notes. He showed no visible signs of remorse. After several hours of emotionally devastating testimony and approximately 10 hours of jury deliberation, a verdict was reached. The judge presiding over the Calgary triple murder case imposed the harshest sentence allowed under Canadian law. Douglas Garland, convicted of the first-degree murders of Nathan O'Brien, Alvin Lickness, and Kathy Lickness, was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms, with parole ineligibility periods totaling 75 years. In practical terms, Douglas would be 129 years old before he could even apply for parole. In the period following Douglas's sentencing, reports indicated that life in custody was far from easy for him. As the details of the crimes became widely known among other inmates, he was subjected to hostility and abuse because of the brutal killing of 3 innocent people, including a 5-year-old child, over a grievance that dated back several years. His actions had marked him as one of the most despised offenders in the prison system. The devastating events of the case left a deep and lasting impact on the family and on society as a whole. The void created by the loss of Alvin, Kathy, and young Nathan was immeasurable. The consequences of this tragedy extended far beyond the courtroom, embedding themselves in the hearts of everyone who had known and loved them. No words can fully capture the pain endured by Nathan's parents. Jennifer and Rod O'Brien continue to face this loss day after day, raising their two sons and learning how to live in a world where their little superhero is no longer by their side. Amid unimaginable grief, Rod and Jennifer found a way to transform their pain into something meaningful. In Nathan's memory, they established the Nathan O'Brien Children's Foundation, an organization dedicated to improving the lives of children facing hardship. The foundation was created to honor Nathan by giving other children opportunities, hope, and support, things his parents believe every child deserves. Nathan loved sports, and in his honor, the foundation organizes annual sporting events for children, including hockey programs. Imagining how much joy he would have found in being part of those games. Another thing Nathan loved dearly was talking with his father before bedtime. Their final conversation remains etched in Rod's memory. That night, Nathan asked what heaven was like, an unusual question for a 5-year-old. He spoke about being a superhero, flying through the sky and cutting through the clouds with his hands. He told his father that one day he would meet his parents in heaven. In hindsight, Rod has often wondered whether his son somehow sensed what was to come. Nathan's mother, Jennifer, watches with tears in her eyes as her son's friends grow older, knowing she will never see her own boy grow into adulthood. The Lickness and O'Brien case remains one of the most tragic chapters in Calgary's history, leaving a permanent scar not only on the city, but on the entire country. The deaths of Alvin, Kathy, and little Nathan stands as a painful reminder of how fragile life can be, and of the importance of cherishing those we love. One peaceful afternoon in Florida, a 13-year-old girl walked into her home to find her 4 younger siblings screaming, crawling around in red stains on the floor. Small, bloody footprints all over the kitchen. There was no sign of forced entry, no goodbyes, just 5 children, left alone beside their mother's body, and the killer who had vanished as if he had never existed. To understand why a mother became the target of such a vicious plan, we must go back many years, to where the tragedy really began. Sheila Lee Walsh, born in Topeka, Kansas on October 19, 1962, met her first husband, Alan Blackthorne, shortly after finishing high school. Sheila was small, kind, and quiet. She had a difficult childhood. Her father, an Air Force pilot, was often away, and he died in Laos when she was only 10 years old. She longed for stability, for love, and for a family she could build with her own hands. After college, Sheila found work as an office administrator at a local law firm. That was where she met the charming, confident Alan, a man who quickly swept the inexperienced young woman off her feet. On their third date, he proposed. Within 3 months, they married. Born in June 1955, Alan was 7 years older and, at least on the surface, far more worldly, but Alan's past held shadows Sheila never saw. Long before adulthood, he showed concerning behavior, cruelty toward animals, obsessive attitudes toward girls, even an accusation of attempted abuse while in high school. He had several minor criminal charges, but thanks to a string of lenient judges and expunged records, the man standing before Sheila looked clean, respectable, harmless. Alan easily gained the trust of Sheila's family. Even after the wedding, none of them suspected what was coming. Soon, he convinced them to invest a large sum into his electronics business, claiming he was preparing to expand. They had no idea the business was already failing. By the time the truth surfaced, Alan had declared bankruptcy and whisked his young, pregnant wife off to Hawaii, far from home, dependent and expecting a baby. Sheila found herself cornered, torn between her loyalty to her parents and the father of her unborn child. She still hasn't realized the cruelty of the man she has been with all her life. Years later, much would be revealed. Alan had been married before. His first wife, Eileen, endured extreme physical and psychological abuse, choking, beatings, even being kicked in the stomach while pregnant. Immediately after childbirth, Alan insisted they give the baby up for adoption because he wasn't ready to be a father. His violence extended beyond people. When their dog had an accident on the carpet, Alan beat the animal to death. Not only that, at one point, he forced situations where Eileen's younger brothers would witness intimate moments, and he often pressured her into degrading scenarios for his satisfaction. He also had a habit of dressing in women's lingerie before asking to be driven to rough neighborhoods, where he would wander home alone, a dangerous thrill he craved. Eileen and her husband had a bad marriage that lasted 5 years. During that time, she became pregnant again. Frightened, she decided to have an abortion and secretly began making plans to leave him. His second wife, Mary, initially believed she had met a loving, attentive father figure, but the facade shattered quickly. Alan used her 2 young children to manipulate and control her, threatening violence if she ever tried to leave. After 3 years of escalating intimidation, she fled with her children in the middle of the night, fortunate to escape the prolonged torment Eileen endured. Then came Sheila. When Alan met her, he saw vulnerability and opportunity. They married in 1982. Until that moment, Sheila had no way of knowing about his abusive past or hidden obsessions. At first, he was everything she thought she needed: loving, attentive, protective. But the mask slipped. Slowly, affection turned into criticism, criticism into anger, and anger into daily emotional warfare. Sheila was young, inexperienced, conditioned to believe that any outburst from the man she loved must somehow be her fault. And Alan, skilled in manipulation, took full advantage of that. The turning point came 6 months into the marriage, when Alan, with Sheila in the passenger seat, was involved in a collision with a motorcyclist. The rider died at the scene, and Alan immediately fled, terrified that witnesses had seen him. He phoned his father, who urged him to file a false report claiming he had been attacked by an aggressive stranger and had driven off only to protect his pregnant wife. Alan was eventually charged with fleeing the scene of a fatal accident and failing to render aid. But the case ended in a hung jury, and the district attorney declined to retry him. In the end, Alan walked away without consequences, despite being responsible for the man's death. After the couple relocated, Alan resumed his attempts to revive his business ambitions. During that time, Sheila's sister visited and was alarmed by her appearance. Sheila was pregnant, but she looked shockingly frail, like the starving children often shown in charity campaigns of the 1,980 seconds. Sheila later admitted to her parents how grim things had become. Yet, despite everything, she had no intention of leaving her husband. Financial dependence kept her trapped. Alan was launching a new business selling electrical muscle stimulators. To secure support, he persuaded relatives to move with them to Honolulu. But in July 1985, the enterprise collapsed. Alan continued advertising the devices, but authorities arrested him and seized his inventory because he lacked the required permits and the machines failed certification. The incident erupted into a public scandal. After the business failed, Alan took Sheila back to California. There, Sheila confided more openly in her sister about what life in Honolulu had been like. Alan frequently insulted her, accused her of affairs, flaunted his own infidelities. He would bring other women into their home and have loud, intimate encounters within earshot of his wife and daughters. Sheila endured it all because she felt financially paralyzed. She had no savings, no support system, and had been isolated from her family. Back in the mainland United States, Alan again managed to attract investors for another business venture, once more involving muscle stimulation devices, this time medically approved. It was during this period that his cruelty escalated. Sheila's sister noticed that Sheila looked older, exhausted, and physically unwell. But alongside this decline came a flicker of resolve. For the first time, Sheila expressed a desire to leave him. A notion sparked after Alan tried to drown her by forcing her head into a toilet and flushing repeatedly. In September 1987, another attack occurred. Alan beat her with a belt before bed, then struck her repeatedly with his fists. Finally, Sheila called the police. Police arrested Alan, but the consequences were minimal, a fine rather than jail time. Sheila seized the chance to flee. She gathered her daughters and ran to the home of Janda, the family's former nanny. Unfortunately, Alan anticipated her escape and intercepted her there. While Janda hurried the children inside, Alan began beating Sheila. A neighbor witnessed the assault and rushed over, managing to drive Alan off. Furious, Alan climbed into Sheila's car, ran over the neighbor, smashed through a gate, then escaped in his own vehicle. He was arrested a few hours later. Miraculously, the neighbor survived with minor injuries. Alan received a $425 fine and 18 months of probation. Following Alan's arrest, Sheila fled with her daughters to Oregon to stay with her sister Carrie. She hid there for several weeks before realizing she could not live indefinitely in secrecy. She needed to face the legal process if she hoped to protect her children permanently. In October 1987, she wrote a detailed, 100-page account documenting years of Alan's abuse. By September 1988, the divorce was finalized in Sheila's favor. She received custody of their daughters, a vehicle, and $1,250 a month in child support. Later, Alan persuaded her to move to San Antonio, promising to buy her a home so she could live closer to the girls. Sheila eventually agreed, a decision she soon realized was a devastating mistake. Once she moved, Alan immediately began manipulating the children against their mother, and child support payments were routinely delayed. Sheila knew Alan had the financial means to pay. He simply chose not to. She had to take him to court for nearly every payment. Alan, obsessed with retaliation, studied family law constantly, searching for loopholes to use against her. He eventually succeeded in reducing the child support amount to $350 in a hearing Sheila hadn't even been notified of. That reduction forced her into further litigation. After additional hearings, the original support amount was reinstated, but each payment remained a battle, a deliberate torment Alan never stopped inflicting. Frustrated and desperate to receive compensation for the years of abuse she had endured, Sheila went back to court demanding her share of Alan's assets. But Alan was exceptionally skilled at hiding his money. Instead of the roughly $250,000 she was entitled to, Sheila received only about $22,000. Despite everything she had suffered, Sheila was determined to rebuild her life and create stability for her children. In August 1992, she met a gentle, soft-spoken man named Jamie Belush. Their relationship blossomed quickly. The two were married in June 1993. Jamie was a devout Christian, a former Marine, and an employee at a pharmaceutical company. Life finally seemed to be turning in Sheila's favor, but Alan was far from finished. He continued to look for new ways to torment his ex-wife. The day before Sheila and Jamie's wedding rehearsal dinner, Alan picked up the girls for a routine visit. Instead of returning them, he sent a bailiff to serve Sheila with yet another lawsuit, this time demanding expanded custody. Sheila and Jamie married the next day, but their honeymoon was overshadowed by the legal hearing that followed. As the girls grew older, around 8 or 9, Sheila began hearing troubling things from them. Her daughter, Stevie, eventually confided that Alan had touched her inappropriately. Sheila used this revelation as leverage, When Alan attempted to file another custody-related lawsuit, she informed him she was prepared to report him for molesting their daughter. Stevie's statement was formally recorded, but Sheila refused to make her daughter face the trauma again in court. The threat alone was enough. Alan backed down. From then on, all communication between them went strictly through attorneys. The children no longer wished to visit Alan, and meanwhile, Sheila began building a new life with Jamie. He wanted children of his own, but Sheila struggled to conceive. They turned to IVF, and in December 1995, Sheila gave birth to quadruplets, 3 boys and 1 girl. For a moment, the chaos of the past seemed finally behind her, yet danger continued to haunt her. When Sheila was 7 months pregnant, her sister Carrie came to visit. Just days earlier, the O.J. Simpson verdict had been announced. Hearing that Simpson had been acquitted of murdering his ex-wife terrified Sheila. She told Carrie she feared that if Simpson could get away with it, then Alan, who had spent years threatening, stalking, and tormenting her, might convince himself he could kill her too. Carrie tried to reassure her, but Sheila remained shaken. She even asked her sister to care for her children if anything ever happened to her, and to contact a woman named Enrule to share what she feared. By June 1997, Alan had filed yet another lawsuit, angry that Stevie had stopped visiting him. Sheila was prepared. She warned him plainly that if he pursued the case, she would report his inappropriate behavior toward their daughter. Realizing she was serious, Alan abruptly withdrew the lawsuit. Shortly afterward, he announced he wanted to terminate his parental rights altogether. Even so, he continued to stalk Sheila from a distance, and she believed he never stopped plotting revenge. Alan manipulated a neighbor into spying on her, convincing the woman that Sheila's children were being mistreated. The neighbor even installed enormous floodlights that shone directly into the Bellish family's bedroom every night. Sheila and Jamie complained repeatedly, but law enforcement did nothing. Eventually, the constant harassment drove them to make plans to move. One afternoon, while the nanny was watching the children, Sheila and Jamie returned home to discover that Daryl, Sheila's daughter from her first marriage, had visited her father. Despite losing all parental rights, Alan had still managed to see her. Sheila panicked, terrified he would discover where they were planning to relocate. In a moment of anger and fear, Sheila struck Daryl once with a belt. With Alan's encouragement, Daryl filed a domestic violence complaint, and because Alan no longer had legal rights to her, Daryl was immediately placed into protective custody while an investigation began. The court eventually found no evidence that Sheila or Jamie had abused or coerced their children. The family then quietly moved to Sarasota, Florida at night. But even there, peace was short-lived. A neighbor from Texas eventually revealed their new address to Alan. Daryl, still in state custody during the ongoing proceedings, remained a constant source of anxiety for Sheila and Jamie, who feared she might unintentionally disclose their location. The Bellishes were so cautious that even their closest friends back in San Antonio were told nothing more than a post office box number. During this period, Sheila's anxiety reached its peak. Even though she had been divorced from Alan for nearly 10 years, the fear that he might someday kill her never left her. And tragically, her fear wasn't irrational. Behind the scenes, Alan Blackthorne was actively trying to track her down. He first hired a private investigator to locate her. When that didn't work, he pressured the man into surveilling every Baptist church in the region, hoping to spot Sheila among the congregations. The task was unrealistic. There were simply too many churches, and the investigator eventually abandoned the effort. Alan then returned to the one vulnerable link he still had access to: Daryl, his daughter, who was in the custody of Child Protective Services due to ongoing court proceedings. Daryl was emotionally fragile and deeply conflicted, yet for months she managed not to reveal the Bellish family's new address, partly because she genuinely did not know it herself. But over time, Alan coaxed bits and pieces from her, Small clues that slowly painted a picture, and once he had extracted the information he needed, he abruptly cut contact with her, ignoring her calls completely. Next, Alan used a ruse. He hired a man to deliver flowers to the general area Daryl had described. The delivery man went door to door at several houses, asking for Sheila. At one home, Jamie Belush opened the door and casually accepted the bouquet, unknowingly confirming the correct address. The deliver flowers called Alan back with the details, unaware he had just become part of something far darker than a flower delivery. 13-year-old Stevie Belush had never had a peaceful life, but everything reached its breaking point on the afternoon of November 7, 1997. She came home from school excited, ready to tell her mother she had been invited on her very first date. But the moment she reached the front steps, something felt wrong. The door was unlocked. Something Sheila never allowed. Inside, Stevie found her 4 younger siblings behaving strangely, screaming in a way she had never heard before. The children, all toddlers, were naked except for life jackets. It looked as if Sheila had been preparing to bathe them in the pool, a normal routine. But something had interrupted her. Stevie walked through the house calling for her mother, but heard nothing. She noticed what looked like red paint streaking her siblings' skin. But at 13, she still didn't fully grasp what she was seeing. Then she entered the living room and saw belongings scattered everywhere, signs of a violent struggle. In the kitchen, she saw clothes on the floor soaked in red. When she lifted them, her world broke open. Her mother, Sheila, lay beneath the pile. Stevie dialed 911, her voice shaking, and told the dispatcher that her 35-year-old mother was dead and that her throat had been cut. The dispatcher stayed on the line until the first officer arrived. The officer walked Stevie outside, where all 4 toddlers clung to her legs, covered in blood. When asked who could have done this, she answered instantly. She knew only one person who had ever wanted her mother dead: her biological father, Alan Blackthorne. Police soon learned that Sheila owned 20% of Alan's profitable medical equipment business, and that Alan owed her $7 million in court-ordered payments, money he had no intention of giving her. The financial motive was overwhelming, but investigators hit their first roadblock. Alan had an ironclad alibi. At the time of the murder, he was at a golf course in Texas. The medical examiner determined that Sheila had been dead for about 2 hours when Stevie found her. The killer first shot her in the face with a .45 caliber handgun. Little Tim, one of the quadruplets, was believed to have been clinging to her when she was attacked. The bullet entered her cheek, exited the back of her head, and sent her crashing to her knees so hard that bruises formed instantly. But she didn't die right away. Sheila somehow stood back up and staggered toward the wall phone. In the kitchen, bleeding heavily, she managed to dial 911, but never spoke, because the killer grabbed a butcher knife from its stand and slashed her throat repeatedly. Even then, Sheila fought. She had multiple defensive wounds, including one deep enough to expose the bone in her arm. The major veins on both sides of her neck were severed. Despite the severity of the wounds, the medical examiner concluded she could have survived if help had reached her in time. Instead, she collapsed on the kitchen floor while her 4 toddlers crawled through her blood, crying and screaming for a mother who could no longer respond. A single fingerprint was found in the dried blood, but it didn't match Alan's or anyone in the household. A broken, blood-stained knife lay next to her body. The crime was brutal. The scene was chaotic, and the killer had vanished. While questioning neighbors, police located the owner of a landscaping company mowing a yard near the Belush home. The landscaper told officers he had seen a white car he didn't recognize pull up to the house earlier that morning. Inside sat a large, intimidating-looking man. Frightened, the landscaper tried not to stare, but he memorized the license plate. When officers ran the tag, it traced back to a woman in Texas, the grandmother of 21-year-old Jose Del Toro. When detectives questioned Alan Blackthorne, he behaved coolly. even giving interviews to the media. He insisted he had only hit Sheila once in their marriage and called it the worst mistake of his life. As expected, he denied killing her and attempted to blame Daniel Alex Rocha, a friend who owned the golf course he frequented. However, his story quickly unraveled. When police reached Daniel, he revealed something far more disturbing. Alan had hired 27-year-old Samuel Gonzalez, first paying him $9,000. Soon after, Gonzalez brought in his 21-year-old cousin, Jose Del Toro, because Alan didn't want to get his own hands dirty. Jose, once a popular high school football star and prom queen's boyfriend, had long since fallen from grace. By 21, he was deep into banned substances and desperate for money. He had a few minor legal problems in the past, but he wasn't known to be violent. That changed when Blackthorne paid him to kill a woman, claiming she was abusing her children. Alan provided Jose with an old photograph of Sheila holding their daughter, taken during their marriage. Investigators later found this photo among Jose's belongings, but Blackthorne made a critical mistake. He hired a pair of unusually incompetent hitmen. Jose used his real identification to check into a motel near the Bellish home. Surveillance footage captured him buying camouflage clothing. During interrogation, he crumbled quickly. Jose admitted sneaking into the garage and watching Sheila with her children, noting she seemed like a loving mother. Completely unlike the monster Alan had described, he claimed he almost backed out. But Alan pressured him relentlessly, insisting Sheila was dangerous, had to be dealt with. Even so, parts of Jose's story conflicted with evidence, making investigators doubt his version of events. Samuel Gonzalez, who introduced Alan to his cousin, Jose Luis Del Toro, pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit murder in June 1998 and was sentenced to 19 years in prison. Daniel Alex Rocha, 29, acted as the middleman connecting Alan with Samuel Gonzalez, was convicted in January 1999 of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole in February 1999. By the time authorities finally located Jose Del Toro, he had already fled to Mexico. With financial help from Rocha, he fought extradition for more than a year. Jose Del Toro was extradited to the United States in July 1999, pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and armed burglary in 2000 in Florida. Judge Paul Logan sentenced Jose to 2 consecutive life terms, the maximum sentence for both charges. At sentencing, he cried and asked Jamie Bellish for forgiveness, vowing to expose everyone involved in Sheila's murder. There's one more important step left, and that's taking down the man who masterminded the entire affair, Alan Blackthorne. With relentless support from Sheila's sister and a team of attorneys, investigators spent 2 full years building the case. Witness after witness came forward describing Alan's long history of abuse toward Sheila and his previous wives. Searches uncovered alarming evidence. Alan and his new wife, Maureen, had been planning Sheila's murder for months. In their garage, investigators found a wall covered with photographs, notes, and a step-by-step plan. Shockingly, the couple seemed so confident in their impunity that they never bothered to remove any of it. During the investigation, Alan transferred nearly $50 million in assets into Maureen's accounts. Jamie Bellish filed 2 civil suits against them, totaling $38 million, and pursued legal action against others involved in the conspiracy. On January 4, 2000, 44-year-old Alan Blackthorne was charged with conspiracy to commit murder and several related offenses. Because he was considered a flight risk, bail was denied. At trial, his daughters Stevie and Daryl testified against him. Alan never once looked at them, showing no emotion, no acknowledgement, nothing. Prosecutors presented nearly 40 pieces of evidence proving a calculated plot to kill Sheila. After closing arguments, the jury deliberated only a few hours before returning a unanimous verdict: guilty on all counts. Alan Blackthorne was convicted of federal charges of conspiracy to commit interstate murder and interstate domestic violence. He received 2 concurrent life sentences without parole. Beginning at the Beaumont, Texas, federal prison, following his conviction, Alan Blackthorne was transferred to federal prison, where he quickly became a target. Inmates attacked him several times, once stabbing him repeatedly, and in another assault, driving a sharpened screwdriver into his eye. Despite the brutality of these attacks, Alan survived. On November 18, 2014, at the age of 59, he died in federal custody in Terre Haute, Indiana. The official cause of death was never released, even within his own family. Reactions were cold and distant. His wife, Maureen Blackthorne, who had been convicted on financial charges in 2004, filed for divorce the following year. Meanwhile, Jamie Bellush took custody of the quadruplets as well as Stevie, Sheila's daughter from her first marriage, but forgiveness did not come easily. Jamie struggled deeply with resentment toward Daryl, who had once confronted Sheila with allegations of abuse and unwittingly revealed clues about the family's location, information Alan Blackthorne later exploited. Although Daryl had been manipulated as a child and never intended harm, Jamie found it difficult to separate her innocence from the catastrophic consequences that followed. In 2001, after years of legal battles, Alan's remaining assets, roughly $4.5 million, were finally unfrozen and distributed among Sheila's children. It offered financial security but could never replace what they had lost. In the months before her death, Sheila had confided in her sister, asking her to contact writer Ann Rule if the worst ever happened. Honoring that request, her sister reached out. Rule later included Sheila's case in her work, ensuring that her story and the brutality she endured would never be forgotten. Hello friends. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Jennifer Paulson. Jennifer Paulson was born on June 23, 1979, in Washington, USA. She grew up in a close-knit family filled with love and warmth. Jennifer has 2 older brothers and shares a strong bond with them. She was a kind child who absorbed everything around her and made friends easily. As a result, she had a large circle of friends and could connect with anyone, regardless of their differences. Jennifer graduated from the Christian Academy, where she excelled academically. She was always eager to help her classmates who were struggling with their studies. In addition to her academic achievements, Jennifer was active in extracurricular activities. She published the weekly school news, tutored part-time, and participated in volleyball, basketball, and softball. A prominent feature of Jennifer and her family was their strong faith. She attended church services every Sunday. After graduating, she attended Seattle Pacific University, about an hour's drive from her parents' home. She set her sights on becoming a teacher, wanting to use her academic achievements to help her community. She excelled in school, earning a bachelor's degree in teaching and then a master's degree in education. During her time in college, Jennifer also volunteered with low-income families, focusing on helping children prepare for college. She has always believed that education is the key to building a successful future. After graduating, Jennifer sought employment and began her career as a substitute teacher at Pierce County Schools. Eager to advance her career, she worked hard to secure a permanent teaching position. She was soon hired by several schools, and in 2004, she became a full-time teacher at Hunt Middle School and Stanley Elementary School. In 2007, she joined Bernie Elementary School, where she dedicated herself to teaching children with special needs and quickly became a favorite among the 5th graders. She believed that everyone deserved a chance at a better future, and helping them achieve that was her true calling as a teacher. She worked with students who faced serious challenges, including fifth graders who were still unable to read. Jennifer had an extremely busy schedule, balancing her teaching responsibilities with her efforts to support her students. While still attending college, she worked part-time at the cafeteria on campus. There, she met a new transfer student from another school named Jed Waits. He also worked at the cafeteria, and those who knew him well had nothing negative to say about him. One striking trait that people who don't know Jed will notice is his unusual style of dress. He often appears somber and frequently wears black. His friends believe that this preference for dark clothing stems from his creative eccentricity, which has been evident since a young age. Jed is an artist involved in a variety of creative activities. He has acted in plays, drawn cartoons for newspapers and yearbooks, and enjoys creating posters and flyers for youth groups. Jed is artistically gifted and can quickly come up with unique creative projects and execute them efficiently. This ability has earned him the respect of his teachers. Additionally, he leads his church's youth group and meets with students monthly to discuss spiritual topics and explore the Bible. Overall, he is a kind and optimistic person. When Jennifer met Jed, they worked together and socialized in the same group, where others often found Jed uncomfortable to talk to. His jokes were frequently considered inappropriate, dark, and confusing. Additionally, he was sometimes rude, even to Jennifer. Although there was no romantic relationship between them, it was clear that Jed had feelings for her. Jennifer, on the other hand, showed no interest in pursuing any relationship. She focused on her studies and had found a job that took up most of her free time. One day at school, Jed decided to express his feelings for Jennifer by asking her out. However, she reiterated what she had told many others before: she was not ready for a relationship until she had established her career. Jed struggled with the rejection, and in a moment of anger, he hit Jennifer, which caused a conflict between them. They resolved their differences amicably but chose to distance themselves, continuing their studies like other students. Both Jennifer and Jed graduated in 2003, with Jennifer earning a degree in special education and Jed earning a degree in English. Their friendship never recovered. In fact, they barely spoke to each other during their final years of school. After graduating from college, Jennifer moved back home with her family, found a job, and began saving money to buy her dream home. She was focused on her goals and wanted to be independent. However, an old acquaintance disrupted her plans. Somehow, Jed Waits discovered Jennifer's home phone number and called her for the first time 2 years after graduation. He said he had served in the National Guard in Kuwait and had just returned from a war zone. Jennifer was polite throughout the conversation and hoped he wouldn't call again, but from that day on, he started calling her frequently. At first, she ignored the calls, thinking he was just bored and contacting everyone, including her. However, she soon became concerned when Jed began calling multiple times a day, distracting and annoying her. When she asked their mutual friends, she learned that Jed didn't call anyone else. Realizing this made her feel uncomfortable. It seemed like he was obsessing over her, which was alarming. Jennifer told Jed that their relationship was impossible and asked him to stop contacting her. However, it seemed like he wasn't listening. Jed continued to call, forcing Jennifer to turn off her phone to avoid his constant calls. Thankfully, her family supported her during this difficult time. Meanwhile, Jed's parents had separated and moved in with new partners. By the fall of 2006, Jennifer Paulson had saved enough money for a down payment on a house and decided to buy one. She found a suitable place a few miles away from her family and was excited to be independent. She also hoped that the move would stop Jed's calls. To her surprise, just a few days after moving into her new home, she answered the phone and heard his familiar, annoying voice. She hadn't even finished unpacking when the call started again. For days, she ignored him, hoping that this would stop Jed's obsession. However, her relief did not last long. After a while, he continued to call her persistently. This situation reminded Jennifer of her past experiences, and surprisingly, Jed stopped stalking her for about a year. During this time, Jennifer was able to relax and thought that Jed might have found someone else. However, she was shocked when he called her back, acting as if nothing had changed, as if they had just met yesterday. From that point on, Jed continued to contact her regularly, calling about 10 times a day or even more. This pattern of behavior continued for several months before stopping for a long period. This pattern of harassment occurred several times over the years, following a similar trajectory each time. In 2008, Jed started calling her again, and this time it was even more disturbing because he had become more aggressive. Jennifer had no idea how far his obsession had gone until he showed up at her workplace. He casually walked past her office and entered without hesitation. This was the most terrifying experience for Jennifer. She realized that she had never told him where she worked, which meant he had been stalking her. Jed coming to her school and walking among the children terrified her. When she told her father, Ken Paulson, what was happening, he was fed up with Jed's constant harassment. Ken later called Jed and asked him to stay away from his daughter, warning him that there would be consequences if he didn't. Instead of staying away, Jed sent Jennifer a gift at work, a bouquet of flowers and a teddy bear. He later visited her in person again. During this meeting, Jennifer confronted him and asked him to stop coming to the school, warning that she would report him to the police if he continued to stalk her. She was genuinely worried about his obsessive behavior. Jennifer then informed the principal and school staff about the situation because she was concerned for the safety of the students. Everyone was alerted and prepared to call the police if he showed up at the school again. Unfortunately, Jed did not stop. The police were called to the school, and the principal was extremely concerned about the situation. He even contacted Jed's commanding officer in the National Guard, who revealed that Jed had a troubled military background. The commanding officer stated that Jed had served for nearly 2 years, but he had been behaving inappropriately from the beginning. During that time, he had gotten into several fights, spat on his teammates, and attacked his superiors. He was eventually deployed to Kuwait, where he finished his service without any commendation. The main reason for his discharge was a serious mental health issue. Jennifer became extremely concerned for her safety due to Jed's disturbing behavior. She then decided to file for a restraining order. In the application, she detailed Jed's inappropriate behavior, including repeated phone calls and unusual visits to her workplace. Jennifer Paulson was granted a restraining order, which legally prohibited Jed from coming within 300 meters of her, either at home or at work. While the order provided some peace of mind, Jennifer knew that it would not fully protect her if the harassment continued. She hoped that the police would respond more forcefully, which eased her concerns somewhat. Although she was frightened, she was prepared to take legal action against Jed if necessary. Jed was informed of the restraining order and the serious consequences he would face if he violated it. By this time, Jennifer was emotionally exhausted and showing signs of stress, but with the restraining order in place, she felt more secure in her life. Jennifer was shocked to see Jed's car honking at her in her rearview mirror. She quickly called 911 and explained that there was a restraining order against him and that she felt threatened. Eventually, the police advised her to drive calmly to the station. When she arrived, the police and their cars were waiting for Jed, who was arrested and taken in for immediate questioning. However, he denied the charges and refused to admit to any allegations related to stalking. While awaiting a court decision, the judge ordered Jed to be held in jail but set bail at $10,000. Normally, bail for such charges is around $2,000, but Jed's unpredictable and dangerous behavior prompted the judge to increase it significantly. Unfortunately, this precaution did not keep Jed in jail, as he was able to post bail. For days after his arrest, Jennifer and her family learned that he had been released. Everyone was in a panic. Jennifer chose not to return home, where she would be alone, and she did not go to work until the situation was resolved. She decided to stay with her family for support during this uncertain time. Jennifer decided to visit her mother. When she arrived, her mother greeted her in tears, expressing her fear that Jed would prevent her from entering the house. Jennifer was also very emotional but immediately expressed her desire to pray for Jed in this situation. She remained optimistic and kind, following her family's advice and staying with relatives. Her brothers planned to protect her at home by taking turns watching over her. However, Jennifer did not want to be confined to the house. She planned to continue working and could not abandon her students. On Friday at 7:30 a.m., Jennifer went to work, preparing to teach her first class of the day. About 400 students, from grades 1 through 5, along with teachers and staff, were at the school, unaware that they were in grave danger. Since 5:30 a.m., Jed had been nearby, parked in a hidden spot while he monitored the roads leading to the school, waiting for the right moment to approach his target. Jennifer arrived safely at work, parked in her usual spot, and walked toward the school. Everything seemed normal. Meanwhile, Jed got out of his car. As he approached her, he suddenly pulled out a gun and shot her in the back. She screamed and collapsed on the asphalt, and he shot her 7 more times. A man who lived across the street witnessed the horrific scene through his window. He heard her scream but couldn't get there in time to help her. Jed then pointed his gun at a passerby and fired, but the man miraculously dodged the bullet. News outlets reported on the shooting at the school where Jennifer worked, urging locals to stay indoors unless absolutely necessary, as the shooter had fled. At the time, no details were available about the victims. Jennifer's father received a call, and her parents quickly drove to the school. They were horrified to learn that Jed had finally achieved his goal and were even more devastated to learn of Jennifer's death. The attack caused chaos, allowing the perpetrator to flee by car. Fortunately, several witnesses saw his face and got a good look at the car he used to escape. He was quickly identified as Jed Waits, the person against whom Jennifer had a restraining order. Only 20 minutes had passed when one of the patrol officers stopped Jed's car about 10 kilometers from the school where he had just killed Jennifer Paulson. The officers were cautious during the arrest, but the situation quickly escalated. Jed refused to surrender. He pulled out a gun and opened fire on the officers. Fortunately, the officers were prepared and returned fire immediately. Thankfully, no officers were injured. Jed was found to be carrying multiple weapons, possibly because he had anticipated a confrontation with the police. The patrol officers shot him multiple times, but the injuries were not fatal. Tragically, 30-year-old Jed Waits took his own life. When his family was informed of the incident, they were shocked. They had no idea that Jed had been involved in such activities for years. They could not believe that a once kind person had become a stalker and a murderer. Jed's family was profoundly affected by the school shooting. His parents were devastated, regretting that they had not been aware of Jed's problems and had not sought professional help sooner. For days after the tragedy, more than 1,500 mourners attended Jennifer Paulson's funeral at the city's cathedral, including friends, family, and classmates. She was well loved. Many of Jennifer's students were deeply saddened by the loss, as her family viewed her as a beacon of hope for their future. In memory of Jennifer Paulson, a garden was created on the school grounds, which remains to this day. About 50 students, mostly from her class, along with their families, contributed to the creation of the garden, each processing their loss in their own way. Jennifer's family struggled to come to terms with her tragic death. Her father, Ken Paulson, wanted to honor her memory by helping others. He spent years creating legislation to better protect victims of stalking, which he called the Jennifer Paulson Law. His main goal was to speed up the government's response to these cases to prevent similar incidents from happening again. The law also classifies online stalking as in-person stalking. Additionally, Ken advocated for public disclosure of information about individuals with a history of stalking, allowing people to check their acquaintances against available databases. If Jennifer had access to this information, she might have learned about his past troubles. In November 2008, after a court ordered Jed not to contact her, he attacked another girl. Although she narrowly escaped death and was seriously injured, the police did not intervene to stop Jed. As a result, he continued to stalk Jennifer. In the United States, victims of stalking are often required to provide evidence of stalking and harassment. In many cases, authorities simply issue warnings. When the initiative was finally enacted into law, Ken felt satisfied, believing it would save countless victims from the tragic consequences of stalking. Although he knew it would not bring back the life of his beloved daughter, Jennifer, who had died at the age of 30, he believed his efforts had been worthwhile. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Natalie Henderson. In 2016, Natalie Henderson celebrated her 17th birthday. She lived in Roswell, while her friend Carter Davis, also 17, was from nearby Woodstock. Although they both attended high school, they attended different schools. For 3 years, Natalie was part of the custodial team at her school, motivated by her aspirations of becoming a lifeguard. Friends described Natalie as cheerful, outgoing, engaging, and confident. She was an active young woman who loved to sing and play the guitar, and she spent hundreds of hours volunteering to help animals. Carter Davis volunteered at a local animal shelter and was a member of both the football and lacrosse teams at his school. Coaches often praised his athletic abilities and encouraged him to play in college. With his energetic and cheerful personality, he was known for always smiling and encouraging his teammates, especially when they faced challenges. Both teenagers had promising futures ahead of them, but tragically, their lives came to an abrupt end one day. At around 6 a.m. on Monday, August 1, 2016, a delivery driver arrived at a supermarket to unload his groceries. However, he noticed something unusual. To reach the unloading area, he had to go around 2 cars parked oddly in the square, which was strange, as there had never been any cars or strangers there before. As he approached, he saw 2 bodies lying motionless on the pavement, surrounded by blood. Panicked, he immediately called emergency services. When the police arrived, they quickly identified the victims as 17-year-old Natalie Henderson and her friend Carter Davis. Both had been shot in the head, and Natalie was found wearing nothing, raising suspicions that she may have been abused. The crime scene indicated a homicide, with no signs of a struggle or weapons nearby. It appeared that the young victims had been shot unexpectedly. The area was secured, and forensic experts began their investigation. The teens were due to return to school in just over a month. However, instead of focusing on their senior year, their parents had to prepare for their funerals. Both schools that Natalie and Carter attended announced a day of mourning and held a fundraiser to support their families. The news of their deaths shocked everyone who knew them, as well as the residents of this quiet town. Natalie and Carter were active, friendly young people who volunteered and participated in sports. They had no known enemies or critics. On the day the bodies were found, 2 candlelight vigils were held in loving memory of the deceased, with hopes that the police would quickly apprehend the person responsible for such a horrific act. In their grief, the city's residents were in a state of panic. They did not know what to think or whether a dangerous criminal could strike again. The media circulated rumors and inaccurate information from the police, which only added to the public's anxiety. The police concluded that Natalie and Carter had been in a secluded area behind the supermarket between 2 and 3 a.m., just hours before their bodies were discovered by a motorist. The condition of the bodies and initial signs from the autopsy supported this time frame. Their parents believed the young couple had been home and asleep, raising the question of why they were in that area so late at night. After interviewing Natalie and Carter's friends, the police learned that they had run away to meet each other. They had been in a relationship but kept it a secret because they feared their families would disapprove due to their young age. As a result, they would meet in isolated locations in the evenings and at night. A witness who had passed by the supermarket about 30 minutes before the bodies were found reported that he had not noticed anything unusual at the time. He did not provide specific details and admitted that he may have missed important information due to the darkness. To gather more information, he contacted the public. The most interesting point was the time between 2 and 3 in the morning, which could greatly assist the investigation. Surveillance camera footage from the crime scene was available, with several recordings made at the same time. The area is usually busy only during business hours, and there is very little activity at night. It was clear that the video cameras were essential for safety, as the isolated and dark street was an ideal location for crime. The police noted that the location could attract young people, and nearby 24-hour restaurants were also considered potential meeting places. Several popular establishments were in the vicinity, including a well-known steakhouse. The police requested footage from these restaurants and began analyzing the recordings. However, they were unable to find any teenagers in the footage from inside these establishments. This suggests that Natalie and Carter were not there to eat but simply to spend some private time together. They posed no threat to anyone and were in a secluded area. Therefore, they may have been victims of random violence or involved in something more sinister. The family stated that the victims had no legal problems and were not involved in any suspicious groups related to alcohol or illegal drugs. They were not engaged in any business activities, and Natalie even volunteered to help teenagers struggling with addiction. The police were certain that the victims were not killed elsewhere, as they found no evidence that they had been dragged or transported in a vehicle. Initially, the police focused on drugs as a possible motive. This idea gained public support because the abandoned area around the supermarket appeared to be a hotbed of illegal activity. However, after 2 days, this theory was dismissed. Surveillance footage from the supermarket helped police identify the killer, described as a thin man with long, unkempt hair. Unfortunately, the footage did not capture his face or license plate number. However, the police were able to identify the suspect before Natalie and Carter's funerals. Police investigated and found that the suspect had used Natalie's debit card at a store near her home and at a gas station. Surveillance cameras captured him, and his cell phone's geolocation data was examined. He was actually near the supermarket at the time of the double murder. Police identified and arrested the suspect, 20-year-old Jeffrey Hazelwood, just a few miles from the crime scene. Initially, police were unsure of Jeffrey's motives, but they believed he acted alone. Multiple government agencies, including the FBI, were involved in the investigation. At around 5 a.m., police arrested Jeffrey at a gas station without any resistance. At the time, Jeffrey lived with his maternal grandparents, who adopted him when he was very young. Little is known about him, making it important to understand what might have driven him to kill Natalie and Carter. He was found to be an active social media user, with police and psychologists noting signs of internal struggles in his posts. The evening before the double murder, he shared a caption photo that read, "Always remember that you are unique, completely unique like everyone else." Some of his posts also contained darker themes and expressed thoughts of ending his life. Jeffrey's grandparents mentioned that he had been in legal trouble for years. A year earlier, he had been sent to a special academy for troubled youth due to his criminal activities. He was involved in a gang, and his grandparents reported that Jeffrey sometimes acted out to the point where they feared for their safety. Jeffrey's mother had separated from his biological father before he was born. During her pregnancy, she used illegal drugs, which negatively affected Jeffrey. From the beginning, she paid little attention to him and essentially abandoned him. As a result, he was sent to live with his grandparents, who lived near the site of the double murder. They were very religious and cared for Jeffrey as best they could, but he did not behave like a devoted grandson. Jeffrey's mother was ordered to pay $40 a week in child support, but she skipped the payments. This led her parents to take legal action, claiming that she owed over $12,000 in child support when Jeffrey was only 9 years old. Eventually, Jeffrey's mother began to care for her son and visited him twice a month. They attempted to set up a time to meet to help her learn how to care for a child, hoping to reunite and allow her to take on a more active parenting role in the future. However, according to Jeffrey's grandparents, he continued to have ongoing problems. In March 2011, Jeffrey failed to report to the police when he was under supervision. His maternal grandparents provided police with a note from Jeffrey stating that he planned to go into the wilderness to survive for a few days. However, He was carrying a 9mm pistol. After a few months, the police decided not to pursue the case further. Eventually, another family conflict arose. Jeffrey ran away again after several days of inappropriate behavior. After his arrest, he promised to behave, but a few months later, he was reported again for swinging a sword in his yard. When the police arrived, Jeffrey explained that he was practicing karate and was doing so outside behind a fence to avoid hurting anyone. However, his maternal grandparents told the police that Jeffrey was behaving inappropriately and posed a danger. Unfortunately, there was still no way to prove any malicious intent. In April 2013, Jeffrey's grandmother contacted the police again, reporting that about 6 weeks earlier, Jeffrey had threatened to blow up a building. Initially, the police did not take these threats seriously, but it soon became clear that the boy was preparing for something. Jeffrey's grandmother became suspicious when she discovered a sword and several knives on him. In February 2015, Jeffrey was charged with weapon theft. It is important to note that until the end, Jeffrey had not shown any aggression toward others and had not harmed his grandparents or strangers. Therefore, the violent actions that led to the deaths of Natalie and Carter shocked the boy's family. After the incident, one of Jeffrey's close friends spoke to the police, explaining that the boy was not a bad person by nature but had struggled with mental illness for many years. These mental health issues contributed to the tragic attack on the loving couple. Although Jeffrey was generally a caring and loving person, he changed dramatically when he began hearing voices in his head. Jeffrey often shared his struggles with a close friend. His issues began in elementary school and led to behavioral problems in high school. It got so bad that he was homeschooled and barely attended school during those years. About 4 months before the shooting, Jeffrey received a diagnosis indicating that he suffered from schizophrenia and other mental health issues. Although he had been on medication for a while, he stopped shortly before the incident, believing that he was getting better and no longer needed help. Sadly, he lost control, leading to the shooting of a stranger. The police worked tirelessly for nearly 2 days to gather details about the horrific crime. Their efforts led to charges being filed, and the trial began just 1 day after Jeffrey was arrested. The results of the forensic examination shed more light on the massacre. Forensic experts found no traces of male fluids on Natalie's body, but some of the injuries raised concerns about possible abuse. Natalie was shot at close range, while Carter was shot at medium range on the left side of the head. The murder weapon was never found. Before the hearing, Jeffrey claimed that he was not involved in the massacre but was merely a witness. He stated that he did not see the attacker but observed the events as they occurred. He mentioned that the girl was worth nothing when she got out of the car and that the attacker then killed them. After the shooting, the attacker took valuables from the car and the girl's purse. However, Jeffrey's testimony did not match the evidence, as surveillance camera footage revealed the actual details of the crime. Later, during a second interview, Jeffrey changed his story. He claimed that a stranger behind the supermarket was responsible. He alleged that this stranger threatened Natalie and Carter with a weapon and forced them out of the car. Jeffrey stated that he had a brief conversation with Carter before the shooting began. He claimed that the girl exited the car at the attacker's request, who then assaulted her on the hood before shooting her. However, this version was also deemed implausible, as police knew that no one else was involved. It was all Jeffrey himself, as shown in the video. During a third interview, Jeffrey confessed to the truth of the events. He admitted to committing all the crimes he had previously mentioned. New information came to light, indicating that he forced the couple out of the car while they were partially undressed. He shot Carter first, then forced Natalie to remove her shirt and underwear. He abused her on the hood of his car before killing her. According to him, he killed Carter first because he thought the young man was strong and capable of defending himself. It is unclear why Jeffrey committed the crime. He stated that he had moved out of his grandparents' house a few days earlier after being expelled from school due to his erratic behavior. He took his belongings, including the clothes he wore during the murder, which were later found hidden at his girlfriend's house, where he had been staying before the incident. Jeffrey's diary contained disturbing entries, including frightening thoughts about killing. His grandparents expressed fear for him. Just before the tragedy, he had mentioned end-life thoughts and a desire to harm others. Based on the evidence gathered, the prosecutor's office filed 12 charges against Jeffrey, including aggravated double murder, abuse, burglary, and illegal possession of a weapon. During the trial, Jeffrey appeared disheveled and unwell. His long hair partially obscured his face, and bystanders observed him mumbling to himself. His behavior became increasingly erratic, with footage showing him fondling an imaginary object on his leg. After a preliminary hearing, Jeffrey was denied bail. His attorney described him as extremely frightened and said he did not fully understand what was happening. The attorney, who took on the case pro bono, believes that everyone deserves legal representation. The defense focused primarily on Jeffrey's mental health, as independent experts had diagnosed him with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. The preliminary hearing was originally scheduled for September 9 but was postponed to October 28. The prosecutor's office intends to pursue the death penalty for the double murder. When Jeffrey appeared in court, he reported that he had not been given his psychiatric medication while in prison. He claimed that he had repeatedly contacted the medical team for medication but had been ignored. The hearing was adjourned again, this time to February of the following year. While Jeffrey appeared unwell during the preliminary hearing, he told the jury otherwise. Jeffrey had been hearing voices for a long time. Some of these voices sounded like demons, while others sounded like friends. He believed he was receiving messages from God through the television and felt as though he was being watched through the walls. He was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, a mental illness that includes symptoms of both schizophrenia and mood disorders, and usually appears during adolescence. Jeffrey also had a long history of mental health problems. In 2001, he was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome. He struggled with anger management, which led to multiple hospitalizations in 2012 and 2013. With the help of appropriate medication, Jeffrey was able to appear in court and eventually grasp the proceedings. His doctor testified in court that Jeffrey experienced voices, hallucinations, and paranoia. Given the circumstances, Jeffrey pleaded guilty by reason of insanity, arguing that he was not in control of his actions when he attacked the two young men. The parents of the victims shared that even in their short lives, Natalie and Carter made a significant impact by dedicating their time to helping others, in stark contrast to their killer. While in prison awaiting trial, Jeffrey attempted to write letters of apology to the victims' families several times. However, he was only able to do so after his health improved with medication. The jury ultimately found him guilty, and Jeffrey Haywood received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Pauline Zeil. On February 22, 1995, Pauline Zeil heard the verdict of the court for the crime she had committed. She was lucky to avoid the death penalty. Instead, she was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Tears streamed down her face as she held the hand of her lawyer, seeking comfort despite her unfortunate outcome. She had avoided being placed in a cell with 5 other inmates on death row. Pauline Zeil was a devoted mother, working 2 jobs to support her children. From her first marriage, she had a daughter named Christina. With her second husband, John Zeil, she had 2 sons. Christina lived with her father's relatives in Maryland for a time and did not live with her mother. Many who knew Pauline considered her a good mother. Although she was abandoned by her mother and grew up in an orphanage, no one suspected that she could become a danger to society, especially to her own family. Christina lived with her grandmother, and they had a good relationship. However, just before a series of unfortunate events, her grandmother gave Christina to her mother in Florida. Because they had been separated for so long, Christina was not happy about this reunion. In June 1994, she lived in her mother's small two-room apartment in Riviera Beach with her two younger brothers and John Zile, her stepfather. John was indifferent to Christina, creating a tense family atmosphere. 4 months later, Christina's mother, Pauline, reported to the police that her daughter had been kidnapped. While in a crowded store, 7-year-old Christina went into the women's restroom and did not return. Pauline searched everywhere but could not find her. The police took her report seriously and began searching for Christina. During a television appearance, Pauline became emotional, begging for her daughter's safe return, but no one suspected that her feelings might not be sincere. As the police investigated, Pauline's family, friends, and acquaintances revealed that the couple often argued. The tension in the family was not only due to Christina's presence but also to Pauline's marriage to her second husband, John. They argued daily, and he was very controlling. He did not hesitate to resort to violence if things went wrong. Neighbors often heard their arguments, and he was also known to have abused Christina. The police speculated that Christina may have run away, feeling resentment toward her mother and stepfather, and sought comfort from her grandmother, where she had a happier childhood. They began to follow up on this line of investigation. The grandmother stated that she had not seen Christina since she returned her to her mother, although she missed her very much. Interviews with witnesses at a nearby store yielded no useful information. No one had seen a girl matching Christina's description that day, and there were no security cameras in the area. Despite a thorough search of the store, they found no trace of Christina. Then the police discovered a crucial clue: Pauline had sold her bicycle and a videotape. When asked about these items at Christina's school, her mother dismissed them, saying they were no longer needed. At the time, everyone was still hopeful that Christina was alive, but this new information was very disturbing. The police began to question whether Christina had actually been in the store that day and considered the possibility that Pauline's story was a lie intended to mislead the investigation. 2 weeks after Christina's disappearance, the police obtained a search warrant and thoroughly searched the home where Christina lived with her mother. Unfortunately, these searches did not yield any useful information. They could not find any clues at the time. Pauline, the girl's mother and the last person to see her alive, became the prime suspect. However, the situation changed dramatically a few days later when Pauline went to the police in tears and confessed. She claimed that her husband, John, had beaten their daughter to death, but insisted it was an accident. Pauline provided a detailed account of Christina's final moments. A victim of domestic violence, she admitted to fabricating the kidnapping story to mislead the police. Her efforts to cover up the crime ultimately contributed to her long prison sentence. John Zile lived with his wife, Pauline, and their sons in a cramped apartment. They struggled financially, and the difficult living conditions may have contributed to negative feelings towards their daughter, Christina. On September 16, 1994, John lost control and beat Christina because she was dirty and had problems with urinary incontinence. Neighbors heard noises, including John's screams and Christina's cries, which sounded different from the typical cries of a child. They could hear muffled thumping, followed by Christina screaming louder. Eventually, the noise died down, but the mother begged John to stop. During the incident, Christina lost consciousness and began to convulse. John hit her hard enough to silence her and covered her mouth with his hand, causing her to choke. When things finally quieted down, neighbors could hear John's panicked voice. John and Pauline hid Christina's body in a closet for a week before moving it to a vacant lot behind a shopping center to bury it. Pauline agreed to reveal Christina's burial location. On October 27th, Christina's body was found. She had multiple stab wounds. Forensic experts confirmed that the cause of death was strangulation. The child had suffocated while trying to cover her face with her hands. Police discovered that while the body was in the closet, the couple had prepared for the burial by purchasing items such as shovels, tarps, cleaning supplies, and other necessary tools. Pauline had acted cautiously. She took Christina's belongings, such as her bicycle and videotapes, to a pawn shop. She later admitted that she had done so to erase the memory of her daughter. However, the reality was simpler. She had used the money from the pawn to pay for the burial and clean the house. Pauline blamed her husband for their daughter's death, claiming that he was responsible for killing her. But later revelations changed the story. John claimed that Pauline never intervened when he was beating Christina. On the day he lost control and attacked Christina, he asked Pauline to call for help to save the girl while she was still alive, but Pauline refused to help their daughter. During questioning, Pauline admitted this. She believed that the girl could still be saved, but she was too afraid of facing the consequences of her actions to take her to the hospital. The police discovered that Christina had been abused many times before. Despite this, Pauline never intervened to stop the abuse. Even when Christina begged Pauline for help during John's attack, Pauline showed no interest. Pauline Zeil and John Zeil were later arrested and charged with child abuse and concealing evidence. Pauline, who has 2 sons, faced losing her parental rights. Realizing this during the first hearing, she voluntarily relinquished her rights to her sons through their attorney. A foster family took in the children. Pauline Zeil's trial began, during which she denied her guilt and blamed John for what had happened. Her lawyer argued that Christina's death was accidental, but the prosecution countered effectively, highlighting clear evidence of violence. The defense claimed there were many mitigating circumstances, stating that Pauline was a loving mother and that her colleagues respected her. The lawyers attempted to argue that Pauline was controlled by John, an abusive husband who kept her in a constant state of fear, which prevented her from fighting back. However, the prosecution pointed out that Pauline herself admitted she could have saved her daughter but chose not to. Relatives from Christina's biological father's side, including her grandmother, who had cared for Christina for many years, claimed that from the moment Christina was born, her mother had considered her unwanted and did not want to care for her. They expressed remorse for returning Christina to her mother, Pauline. The prosecution argued that John played a key role in Christina's murder. They claimed that Pauline's actions were completely contrary to her maternal instincts, as she failed to protect her child and did not call for help. Pauline's lawyers disputed this view. However, there was no doubt that both parents were responsible for her death. After an hour and a half of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict. They agreed with the prosecution and found Pauline Zeil guilty of first-degree murder because she was with John when he harmed her and actively participated in covering up the crime, including burying the child in a vacant lot. As a result, she was sentenced to life in prison, plus an additional 13 years for concealing evidence and child abuse, rendering her ineligible for parole. When Pauline's sentence was announced, she cried tears of joy, relieved to avoid the death penalty in the electric chair. Although her lawyers planned to appeal the verdict, claiming it was unjust, their efforts were rejected. The prosecutor stated that the verdict should serve as a warning to abusive parents, emphasizing that such individuals would face serious legal consequences. The case provoked a strong emotional response from the public. As a result, the jury had to be changed to ensure their decision was fair. Many were shocked that Pauline did not intervene to save her daughter, did not call for help, and actively participated in the cover-up of the horrific crime. The public reaction led to a wave of protests. Experts noted that many children are often victims of violence at the hands of their own parents. This situation has been exacerbated by a series of similar crimes in recent years. In California, a woman killed her 3 children, the youngest being 4 years old and the others being 8 and 9. She attempted to blame her husband, who lived far away from the children. The husband fought for custody of the children but had a solid alibi, as he was hundreds of miles away when the tragic events occurred. In 1998, the woman was sentenced to death and is still awaiting execution. There have been many similar cases reported in the media, most notably the 1983 case of Elizabeth Diane Downs. Elizabeth claimed that a stranger shot her 3 children after she picked him up on a deserted road. However, it was revealed that she had shot them herself. Her 7-year-old daughter died as a result, and her 2 other children were left disabled. Elizabeth is currently serving a life sentence for first-degree murder and attempted murder, with the possibility of parole after 25 years, but she has been denied parole several times. A common theme in these cases is that mothers often try to blame their husbands for their actions. Police have become increasingly skeptical of these attempts at blame. This skepticism is evident in Pauline's statements, as police note that her case is not an isolated one. There are many cases of postpartum depression and similar issues affecting mothers. A psychiatrist points out that many tragic child deaths could have been prevented if mothers had received proper support. However, in Pauline's case, there was no indication of any mental health issues, which is why she is facing serious charges. Everyone involved in the case knew the details and believed that Pauline could have prevented her daughter's death. Not only did she fail to stop her husband, but she also missed the opportunity to seek help. When she called for assistance, she could have received guidance that might have saved Christina. However, Pauline deliberately chose not to pursue this option. It was also revealed that Pauline had worked as a nurse. She had a medical degree and was educated and trained in emergency care. Despite this, she made no attempt to help her daughter. John Zile's trial then began. The prosecutor aimed for the harshest punishment, seeking the death penalty by electric chair. John admitted to beating Christina but denied any responsibility for her death. He claimed it was an accident and that he had no intention of killing her. He had simply misjudged his own strength. His first trial ended in a mistrial due to the jury's inability to reach a unanimous decision. His second trial took place in another city in November 1996, where he was convicted of first-degree murder, concealing evidence, and aggravated child abuse. He was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, plus 30 years for child abuse and concealing evidence. John listened to the verdict with an impassive expression. The judge ruled that the case was not serious enough to warrant the death penalty, so he overturned that aspect of the sentence. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Jennifer Clark. Donald Clark, 40, and Jennifer Clark, 30, are a married couple living in the small town of Zebulon, Georgia, USA. For a time, their life together seemed happy. They have 2 sons together, and Donald also has an adult daughter from a previous relationship. Donald and Jennifer met in 1996 when Jennifer was 18. Despite a 10-year age gap, they quickly connected and got married in 1997. The following year, they welcomed their first son, and 2 years later, their second son was born. The family settled in Zebulon, a quiet rural town. Donald has always been a hardworking man. He dropped out of high school and started working immediately at a local factory. Over time, he pursued further education, and advanced his career within the same company. Jennifer, on the other hand, worked as a nurse at a nursing home. Like any marriage, their relationship seemed harmonious at first. However, after the birth of their children, things began to change. Donald's daughter noticed that Jennifer was increasingly critical of him. When Donald's daughter became old enough, she decided to move out of the house. She chose to live with her grandparents due to Jennifer's erratic behavior. Unable to wait until adulthood to leave, she moved out early to escape the conflicts caused by her stepmother. For a while, Donald's daughter lived in Florida, but at 19, she became pregnant. She decided to move back in with her father for support. During this time, Jennifer and Donald appeared to be rebuilding their relationship. However, by the time the baby was born, Donald's daughter noticed that her father's relationship with Jennifer had deteriorated again. As before, the house was filled with arguments, and Jennifer continued to pressure and humiliate Donald. Once again, Donald's daughter was forced to move out. Many people advised Donald to end the marriage, but he hesitated because he appreciated Jennifer's housekeeping skills and her role in their daily lives. In early 2008, the couple moved into a new home in the same town. Around the same time, Michael Yost, the 22-year-old son of Donald's best friend Charlie, moved in with them. Michael had serious legal problems, had dropped out of school, and had begun using illegal drugs, which led to more charges and increased police surveillance. Hoping to help Michael turn his life around, Donald invited him to live with them. Jennifer quickly became close to Michael, which soon aroused Donald's suspicions. Eventually, Donald directly asked Michael if he was having an affair with Jennifer. Michael admitted to the affair. This revelation did not seem to surprise Donald, as Jennifer had been unfaithful to him on several previous occasions. Despite her repeated infidelity, Donald always forgave Jennifer, hoping to keep their marriage intact for the sake of their children. After learning about the affair, Donald asked Michael to move out of their home. Donald began to wonder what more he could do to make his wife happy. He provided for her and their children, was a loving husband, and a devoted father. However, it became clear to everyone that the problem was not Donald, but Jennifer. Donald decided to have an honest conversation with Jennifer about their problems. They finally came to the conclusion that it was time to separate. Over the next few days, they thought it over and ultimately agreed that divorce was the best decision. Everything seemed normal, with no signs of trouble. However, on the night of March 7, Donald woke up to find a sheet covering his face. He quickly threw the sheet off and was nearly hit in the head with a baseball bat that his wife Jennifer was holding. Donald immediately called the police to report his wife's unprovoked aggressive behavior. However, when the police arrived, he calmed down and decided he didn't want Jennifer to face legal consequences, so he withdrew the complaint. The incident, nonetheless, left an impression on the police. The next day, Donald went to court and filed for divorce. Jennifer left the house and moved in with Michael. At the time, Michael was living with his grandmother. Jennifer moved in with him, leaving the children in Donald's care. The breakup seemed to work out for everyone. During this time, Donald's friends noticed that he began to do much better. Eventually, life started to improve for him. Meanwhile, Jennifer told her family about her new relationship with Michael, and they were harshly critical. Her mother called it the stupidest decision she had ever made, claiming that Jennifer had left a wonderful husband and family for someone who wasn't worth it. By the spring of 2008, Donald and Jennifer had separated, but were still not divorced. During this time, Donald focused on his work and devoted all of his free time to caring for their two sons. Raising the boys alone was a challenge for him, so he decided to hire a live-in nanny. The nanny, Danielle Young, was a single mother in her 20s with two children from previous failed relationships. Donald met Danielle at a bar shortly after his separation. She immediately caught his attention, and they spent the evening talking. A few weeks later, Donald offered her a position as a babysitter for his children. Their relationship soon developed into a romantic one. During this time, unexpected problems arose. Jennifer discovered she was pregnant, but couldn't be sure whether the father was Donald or Michael. A DNA test was required to determine paternity. Jennifer decided to share the news with Donald. She went to his home, unaware that he had hired Danielle as a babysitter. Despite their separation, Jennifer became enraged when she saw another woman in the house. She stormed in, causing a scene, screaming and arguing. She then grabbed a baseball bat, threatened to harm Donald, and left the house. Danielle was shocked by the events that unfolded. She feared not only for her own safety, but also for the safety of her children. She became convinced that Jennifer was a threat to her sons. During the summer, Danielle decided to move away from Donald, partly because of their 17-year age gap. Meanwhile, Jennifer and Donald's divorce was finalized in July 2008. At the same time, a paternity test revealed that the child Jennifer was carrying was actually Michael's. Living conditions at Michael's grandmother's house were poor. Unfortunately, neither Jennifer nor Michael could afford to move out. A few months later, the couple moved into Donald's sister's house. She is very close to Donald and was surprised when he asked her to let Jennifer and Michael stay with. However, she agreed to help. Donald was likely trying to reconcile with Jennifer. He kept insisting that the boys needed a mother, and repeatedly tried to convince her to reunite and rebuild the family. However, Jennifer continued to refuse until October 2008. She eventually agreed to Donald's proposal and decided to return. She had come to realize that Michael was a failure. As both a husband and a father, he did not work, had no money, and their family lived in poverty. This ultimately led her to return to Donald. After her return, Jennifer resumed managing the household, taking care of the children, and handling daily responsibilities. Donald continued to work hard and spent his free time with his sons. Notably, he even accepted Jennifer's unborn child with Michael as his own, and planned to raise the child as part of the family. Despite their reconciliation, it was evident to everyone that the couple's relationship was extremely toxic, and even worse than it had been before the divorce. Nevertheless, Donald stubbornly clung to the illusion of a happy family life. Meanwhile, Michael came home from work to find Jennifer gone. She had left, taking all her belongings without saying a word. Later, Michael discovered that she had returned to her ex-husband, Donald. This devastated him, as he had been confident in the life they were building together and had even planned their future. In desperation, Michael begged her to come back. The situation became tense and unpredictable, with the potential to spiral out of control at any moment. On November 19, 2008, just before Thanksgiving, Donald's sister began to worry about him, as she had not heard from him for several days. While this might not have been a concern for most people, it was unusual for Donald, who was always in constant contact with his family. His complete silence raised red flags. Unable to reach him directly, she contacted Jennifer, who claimed she had no idea where Donald was. Following their conversation, Donald's sister went to the police to report him missing. Officers visited Donald's home and spoke with Jennifer. She explained that she had last seen him the previous night and had not noticed anything unusual. According to Jennifer, Donald had come home after work, had dinner, watched TV, and gone to bed. The next morning, he left for work as usual. Jennifer claimed they had exchanged text messages during his shift while she was taking the kids to school. Donald had read and responded to her messages. She then spent the rest of the day doing chores. But Donald did not return home at his usual time. She said she had no idea where he could be, and noted that his phone, wallet, papers, and car were all missing. Jennifer speculated that he might have run away. Donald's sister, however, strongly disagreed. She believed that such behavior was completely out of character for Donald. She knew he had done everything he could to make the relationship work, that he always put his family first, and that he would never consider running away. While gathering more information, Donald's sister discovered that he had been seeing a woman named Danielle. This revelation shifted the police's focus. They began to consider the possibility that Donald had left to escape his toxic relationship with Jennifer and was now with Danielle. Based on these details, the police concluded that Donald might have left to pursue happiness and would eventually return. Donald's sister refused to give up. She printed flyers and distributed them widely. Although the search yielded no results, it prompted the police to take further action. They noted that Donald had not committed any crimes or made any bank transactions since his disappearance. Additionally, his cell phone had not been used. These details led the police to suspect that he had not simply run away. Police began piecing together a timeline of events from the day he went missing. However, witness testimonies were inconsistent, making it impossible to determine the exact time of his disappearance. Donald's boss shared an intriguing story about him. According to the boss, Donald was determined to repair his relationship with Danielle. However, he discovered that Danielle was pregnant with another man's child. Although her relationship with the baby's father had ended, Danielle chose to keep the baby and was navigating the challenges of motherhood. Donald, who often confided in his boss, revealed just days before his disappearance that he wanted to end his toxic relationship with Jennifer and was considering starting a family with Danielle. Donald's sudden disappearance left his workplace baffled. He stopped showing up to work, didn't contact anyone, and ignored all attempts to reach him. This behavior was completely out of character for Donald, who was known for being responsible and punctual. He had recently been promoted and was putting more effort into his job, making it hard to believe he would abandon everything without explanation. Hoping to find Donald safe, the police went to Danielle's house. However, Danielle told them she hadn't seen or been able to contact him. She became very distressed when the police informed her of his disappearance. Danielle confirmed that both she and Donald had wanted to reconcile and that she had been waiting for him. She fully cooperated with the investigation, providing an alibi that was verified, ruling her out as a suspect. The police explored various scenarios to uncover a motive for Donald's disappearance, but found no explanation or trace of him. As time passed, the likelihood of finding him alive grew slim. On November 25, 2008, Jennifer gave birth to a son. Around the same time, the police obtained a search warrant for Donald's home. What they found in the master bedroom was disturbing. The room smelled strongly of cleaning products, and the bed appeared unusually clean, as though it had been scrubbed with a strong solution. The mattress and sheets were brand new, and the wall behind the headboard had also been scrubbed. However, only certain areas of the room had been cleaned. The wallpaper on one wall was noticeably faded and white, in stark contrast to the rest of the room, which was dusty and cluttered. Jennifer claimed she had cleaned the room to prepare for her son's birth, but her explanation didn't add up. Only one wall had been cleaned, while the rest of the house remained messy. Forensic experts examined the scene and found microscopic drops of blood. When questioned, Jennifer admitted there might be blood in the room, explaining that her 3 young children often fought and could have injured themselves, causing nosebleeds. She claimed her cleaning efforts were simply part of maintaining the room. However, her explanation raised doubts. Why had she focused on cleaning just one wall while leaving the rest of the house untouched? It seemed clear she had attempted to hide evidence and was now trying to mislead the investigation. Despite their suspicions, the police couldn't get Jennifer to confess. The police decided to question her children, who provided important details about the night Donald went missing. The teens mentioned that their mother had slept in the bedroom with their father that night. Later, they were awakened by the sound of someone running on the first floor. When they got up to investigate, they discovered that the back door of the house was wide open, which was unusual for their family. The children admitted they did not fully understand what had happened. Their mother, Jennifer, avoided discussing the incident. However, their testimony supported Jennifer's alibi, suggesting that she was unlikely to be involved in Donald's disappearance. The police then shifted their focus to other suspects, particularly Michael. He had a clear motive, as his girlfriend Jennifer had recently reconciled with Donald, her ex-husband. Several neighbors reported seeing Michael's pickup truck near Donald's house that evening. Michael was arrested and questioned, but the police obtained no useful information from him. He was later released, though he remained the prime suspect in the case. A significant breakthrough in the investigation occurred on December 23, when a random witness contacted the police station to report an unusual discovery. While walking his dog, the witness noticed the animal chewing on something. Upon closer inspection, he realized it was a wallet containing Donald's ID. Authorities quickly responded and noted that the discovery site was near Michael's mother's house. This prompted the police to conduct a thorough search of the surrounding area. During their search, they found a baseball bat and several other items along the road. Based on these findings, the investigation was expanded to include the area near Michael's mother's home. A nearby field drew the attention of the police. After approximately an hour of searching through bushes, police found a camouflage tarp concealed beneath layers of leaves and branches. Something was wrapped inside. When they opened it, they discovered a body, its head encased in a plastic bag, wrapped in the tarp. Tattoos on the body allowed police to identify it as Donald Clark. The cause of death was determined to be multiple blunt force traumas to the head. One detail stood out to investigators: Donald was wearing pajamas. This finding contradicted Jennifer's earlier claim that Donald had gone to work. It appeared that he had been killed while sleeping in bed. Michael and Jennifer were preparing to celebrate Christmas together when police arrested them. Jennifer showed no signs of grief over her ex-husband's death and seemed content with her life with Michael. However, during a subsequent interrogation, Jennifer completely changed her story. She admitted that she had initially been sleeping in the same bed with Donald on the morning he went missing. At some point, Jennifer claimed, she awoke to find Michael standing over Donald, holding something in his hand. Terrified, Jennifer panicked and ran to her son's room, locking the door from the inside. The commotion woke the children, and from inside the locked room, Jennifer said she could hear Michael beating Donald to death with a baseball bat. After the attack, Jennifer claimed that Michael knocked on the bedroom door and demanded her help cleaning the scene. She stated that she complied out of fear for her own safety, believing she might be his next victim. Jennifer accused Michael of being a manipulative and abusive person who had kept her under oppressive control. She admitted that they cleaned the bedroom walls with bleach and replaced the blood-stained sheets and mattress with new ones. Jennifer said she later helped Michael carry Donald's body to the car, where Michael wrapped Donald's head in a plastic bag to minimize the amount of blood left at the crime scene. Michael, however, provided a completely different account. He denied Jennifer's allegations and claimed that she had never truly ended their relationship. According to Michael, Jennifer wanted to reconcile with Donald only to obtain financial benefits from him. He maintained that he and Jennifer were still seeing each other regularly and stated that, on the night of the murder, Jennifer called him around 1 a.m., asking to meet for intimacy. Michael alleged that Jennifer used a flashlight to signal him when he arrived at the house, indicating it was safe to enter. She supposedly assured Michael that Donald would not be home. However, when Michael entered the house, he claimed he found Donald asleep in the bedroom. Jennifer took an aluminum baseball bat from the closet and repeatedly struck Donald in the head. She then begged Michael to help dispose of the body and clean up the blood. Feeling he had no choice, Michael agreed. He later claimed that Jennifer was a dangerous manipulator who had controlled him throughout their relationship. Michael admitted to helping move the body out of town and scattering Donald's belongings in various locations. However, he kept Donald's cell phone. They used it to send text messages to Jennifer, pretending Donald was still alive. After conflicting interviews, both were arrested and charged with the premeditated murder of Donald Clark. Police believed they had planned the crime together. Michael was also charged with planting evidence to mislead the investigation. Jennifer's lawyers immediately contested the charges, arguing that she was 9 months pregnant at the time and unlikely to have beaten a grown man to death without assistance. Facing the possibility of the death penalty, Michael opted for a plea bargain with the prosecution. He admitted to complicity in planning the murder, destroying evidence, and obstructing the investigation. In exchange for his testimony against Jennifer, he received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 30 years. The trial, delayed several times, finally began on January 31, 2011. The prosecution's star witness was Michael. He testified that on the night of the murder, Jennifer had called him, saying she wanted to leave Donald. Michael initially refused to help. Later, Jennifer called again, saying she had packed her bags and needed to be picked up. When Michael arrived, Jennifer attacked Donald and killed him with a baseball bat. Michael also revealed that Jennifer had threatened to cut ties with him if he didn't help cover up the crime and dispose of the body, which prompted his involvement. Several witnesses described Jennifer as argumentative and confrontational. After less than an hour of deliberation, the jury found Jennifer Clark guilty on all counts, including murder and tampering with evidence. She was sentenced to life in prison plus 60 years. Both defendants are currently serving sentences in state prisons. All of Jennifer's appeals have been denied,